Chapter 2966. With the underworld holy robe, Ming-Di's strength was guaranteed. His entire body was protected and he didn't need to be as careful as before. He could fight Yi Shiwen to the death. Ming-Di looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. He was indignant. Back then, Yi Shiwen was just an ant in his eyes. He was nothing more than a nobody. However, in just a short period of time, that insignificant ant from back then had already gained the strength to suppress him. This was the consequence of indulgence. If one didn't remove the roots, they would grow again. Since he had already missed the best opportunity to kill Yi Shiwen, it wasn't too late to kill him now. Yi Shiwen, this is the end. Don't you cherish your hard-earned throne? Ming-Di looked at Yi Shiwen coldly, his eyes flashing. Die! Ming-Di roared. He charged forward almost instantly. He was also a peerless warrior. Ming-Di's Tao and the heavenly Tao were one. His entire being seemed to have melded with the heavenly Tao. He borrowed the boundless might of the heavenly Tao and was unimaginably tyrannical and powerful. This was an astonishing secret technique. Just one move was enough to tear the sky apart and transform the galaxy into love. It was incomparably terrifying. This was the technique of a fourth realm Emperor Lord. It was ridiculously powerful. Even Yi Shiwen, who was only a second realm Emperor Lord, felt an astonishing amount of pressure. If he wasn't seriously injured, Yi Shiwen's current strength would probably not be a match for the fourth realm Emperor Lord. But there were no ifs in this world. After all, if Yi Shiwen was given some time, it would only be a matter of time before he reached the fourth realm. He wasn't discouraged. 6 Daos suppressing samsara, Yi Shiwen roared. He had also become extremely dangerous. The time magic robe on his body erupted with dazzling rays of light. Countless power of time covered his body, making him look incomparably mystical. At the same time, he had also become extremely dangerous. Yi Shiwen's punch was unarmed, but with the protection of the dark Bodhi divine hand, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage even if he were to clash with a Tao treasure. Boom! This strike directly caused the sky to explode. Endless divine light splashed out, and the divine marks of heaven and earth also began to dim. Even the laws began to gradually disappear and melt. All kinds of laws danced in the air, and golden light shone brilliantly. The heaven and earth seemed to have transformed into an incomparably huge divine treasury. This attack was completely different from before. Ming-Di was no longer at a disadvantage. With the protection of the underworld Tao Saint robe, he did not need to split his attention on defense. He could fight with all his strength and explode forth with all his might. Yi Shiwen's attack landed on the underworld Tao Sage robe, and was completely absorbed. It was impossible to injure Ming-Di, who was still inside the underworld Tao Sage robe. Yi Shiwen, hand over your life, Ming-Di roared. After missing his first attack, he launched another counterattack. Yi Shiwen didn't want to be outdone. He stretched out his arms and used the 6 paths of reincarnation fist in his left hand and the overturning sky seal in his right hand. These two shocking martial arts burst out with unimaginable power in his hand. It was simply not something that ordinary people could imagine. Right now, Yi Shiwen was very strong. He was very good at shooting. These martial arts were no longer the same in his hands. He had completely restored the glory and power that he had in the past. This was the power of an emperor. He could easily use all the martial arts at his fingertip. The blazing light exploded as the two sides collided. The sky shattered once again, and the primal chaos poured out, forming an ocean of primal chaos. The scattered chaos continued to fall, and it was unknown how many people were injured. Both sides who were still fighting fiercely trembled with fear. A battle between emperors. This is the true horror. This was especially so for those supreme geniuses. They were way too arrogant, and even felt that even if they weren't comparable to monarchs, they shouldn't be too far off. After all, monarchs were existences of a higher level, and they were merely separated by a single level. However, they had never imagined that a single level of separation would cause such a huge disparity. This was something that no one had ever imagined. The aftermath of the battle between the two could really crush them to death. Emperor, Emperor. We must become Emperor, Emperors. A real man should be like this. After experiencing the initial shock, these supreme geniuses didn't feel fear. On the contrary, a strong feeling of unwillingness to admit defeat rose in them. Yi Shiwen had only become Emperor-Emperors a little earlier than them. What's so great about that? If they were given a few more years, especially after the confinement period was broken, they would have the possibility of becoming Emperor-Emperors. At that time, it would be possible for them to catch up with Yi Shiwen. On the battlefield, Yi Qianqian held the Devil's giant ship and swept all the way. No one could stop her. However, she didn't care about these ordinary people. She was looking for the Underworld Lord. Over the years, they had fought more than once or twice. She could take advantage of this opportunity to kill him in one fell swoop. In the entire Netherworld Kingdom, besides the Netherworld Emperor, the Underworld Lord was the biggest threat. He had the hope of becoming Emperor-Emperors in the future. This in itself was a threat. However, she was only one of the arrowheads. Under the leadership of the various supreme geniuses, the allied forces of the various races split up and directly killed their way into the Netherworld Kingdom. Many of the Netherworld Kingdom's forces immediately collapsed. Although the Netherworld Kingdom was indeed very strong, they couldn't withstand the combined forces of the various realms. As the blood of both sides flowed like rivers and corpses piled up like mountains, far away in the distant sky, the battle between Yi Shiwen and the Netherworld Emperor had also reached its climax. It wasn't clear whether they had fought thousands or tens of thousands of times. Every time they exchanged blows, the blood of both sides would surge. However, slowly Yi Shiwen, whose blood was terrifyingly vigorous, slowly gained the upper hand. Even so, the Netherworld Emperor didn't panic even though Yi Shiwen was slowly gaining the upper hand. This was because it was normal for a battle between Emperor-Emperors to take a long time. Many times, victory or defeat could be decided in an instant. If they were to cross swords at this time, then they would definitely suffer a great loss. Do you think it's possible to protect yourself without going all out? Yi Shiwen finally spoke. He had already gained the upper hand in this battle. He could tell at a glance that the Netherworld Emperor was conserving his strength. It wasn't because he looked down on Yi Shiwen, but because he still had to suppress his internal injuries. If he went all out, the outcome would be completely unimaginable. A cold smile appeared on Yi Shiwen's face. The Netherworld Emperor was currently in a dilemma. If he didn't go all out, then he would slowly be worn down by Yi Shiwen. If he went all out and didn't suppress his internal injuries, then he would die even faster and collapse on the spot. And the one who had forced him to this point was naturally Yi Shiwen. You don't have to worry about that. Netherworld Emperor's unhurried face revealed a hint of anger. Just as Yi Shiwen had predicted, he had been forced into a dead end. This was also why he had tolerated Yi Shiwen time and time again. Even though he had attacked, he had always retreated thousands of miles if his attack failed. He hadn't fought to the death with Yi Shiwen. The injuries he had sustained since a long time ago had yet to heal. If he went all out, he might die. Because of this, he felt that it wasn't worth it to fight to the death with Yi Shiwen. If he died, then whose fault would it be? But now Yi Shiwen had already forced his way into his Netherworld Kingdom. He had nowhere to retreat and could only fight to the death with Yi Shiwen. Even though he said this, he wasn't careless at all. He brandished his halberd repeatedly and countless dragon roars tore through the sky. He used all kinds of extreme techniques. His fighting techniques weren't inferior to Yi Shiwen's, especially since his cultivation was stronger than Yi Shiwen's. There wasn't much knowledge that could be used to suppress Yi Shiwen. Netherworld Emperor's body also released a lot of death energy. These energy had been condensed in his netherworld kingdom for countless years. It was very empty. Even an Emperor Lord would be contaminated and corroded by just a little bit of it. This was his home ground. Naturally, he had an advantage that others couldn't compare to. Emperor Lords were too difficult to kill. Even if they were seriously injured, they still had their own tricks up their sleeve. They weren't people that outsiders could bully. Fortunately, Yi Shiwen was wearing the time robe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to take it head-on even with his gilded tyrant form. He would be fine for a while, but if he was continuously corroded, even he would be affected. In this kingdom of death, I am the true ruler. No one can defeat me here. Netherworld Emperor roared and increased his strength. He fought Yi Shiwen tit for tat, not willing to show any weakness. Blood was still flowing out of his body. Without the suppression of his Dharma power and cultivation, the Tao injuries were starting to act up. In such an intense battle, the backlash from every collision was a huge problem. To Yi Shiwen, it was just his qi and blood surging. As long as he suppressed it, he could still suppress it. But to Netherworld Emperor, it was really about to bleed. Again, after the collision, Yi Shiwen roared and launched a counterattack. Without waiting for Netherworld Emperor to attack, a long sword appeared in his hand and he slashed at Netherworld Emperor. Bam! The power of this attack exceeded the limits of Netherworld Emperor's endurance. It sent him flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was instantly sent flying. You see, your strength is declining, and my strength is still improving every moment. After breaking through the bottleneck of the second realm, for me, it will be a period of rapid development, and this is no longer your era. Why don't you quickly surrender? Yi Shiwen shouted. A trace of confusion and uncertainty appeared in Mingdi's eyes as he listened to Yi Shiwen's roar. Chapter 2967. As an Emperor Lord, Mingdi's mental fortitude was unfathomable. It wasn't something that ordinary people could compare to. It was almost impossible for him to be shaken or confused. But now, his spirit was shaken by Yi Shiwen's loud shout. This in itself was already incredible enough. This also proved that Mingdi wasn't as nonchalant as he appeared on the surface. Yi Shiwen's aggressive attack had a huge psychological impact on him. Even if it was just a trace, it was enough. Of course, Yi Shiwen had broken through to the second realm in such a short period of time. This was also a huge deterrent to Mingdi. Back then, he had spent dozens of times more time to break through to the second realm than Yi Shiwen. Not to mention that his strength at the second realm was far inferior to Yi Shiwen's. This was a huge blow to a powerhouse like him. After all, they were all sovereign emperors. Who would admit defeat? In the same cultivation realm, who was weaker than the other? They would not easily admit defeat. Although he couldn't return to the second realm to compete with Yi Shiwen, he could deceive others, but he couldn't deceive himself. This was the real reason why his Tao heart was shaken. He wasn't the strongest. This was the problem. Emperor Lords were the strongest. No one would admit that they were inferior to others in the same realm. This is my chance. Yi Shiwen instantly grasped this opportunity. This was the main reason why he said those words. He wanted to end the battle quickly and kill Mingdi. Otherwise, even if Yi Shiwen had the confidence to kill Mingdi, he wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. Moreover, Mingdi wasn't the only threat in this world. That mysterious existence really made Yi Shiwen uneasy. Normally, he wouldn't be afraid. But when fighting other Emperor Lords, he had to take this unstable factor into consideration. He couldn't ignore it. Yi Shiwen attacked mercilessly. The Avicii sword slashed out, bursting with terrifying power. Everything happened in an instant. Boom! Heaven and earth seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Time reversed and space collapsed. The two major elements that made up the universe had collapsed. There was no possibility of the universe existing anymore. Everything turned into chaos and blasted out. This was the might of Yi Shiwen's all-out attack. Ordinary people simply didn't have such formidable strength. They couldn't even imagine it. This strike had penetrated more than half of the Underworld Kingdom. If it wasn't for the fact that the Underworld Kingdom was a special place, this punch would have been enough to destroy an entire world. When Yi Shiwen and D&I were fighting before, he didn't know how many of them were severely injured or destroyed. This attack had taken advantage of Ming Di's weakness. It was only for a split second, but it was enough for Yi Shiwen. Ming Di's expression changed. He regained his composure, but it was too late. Yi Shiwen's attack was already upon him. He hadn't expected Yi Shiwen to be so decisive. A battle between sovereign emperors would only last for an instant. Boom! Yi Shiwen's sword fell on the underworld Dao sage robe in an instant. An astonishing space-time annihilation appeared, and everything disappeared without a trace. Pooh! Ming Di spat out a mouthful of blood as his entire body was sent flying. Ming Di roared, but there was nothing he could do. Yi Shiwen's sword was too strong. Although it hadn't cut through the underworld Dao sage robe, the terrifying force of the collision had worsened his injuries. There seemed to be many wounds on his body, and blood splattered everywhere, turning into a bloody mist. If one was caught in an instant, one would be severely injured. This was the terror of a battle between sovereign emperors. On the other side of Yi Shiwen, the sky-flipping seal came crashing down, smashing everything in front of him into pieces. It chased after Ming Di and smashed him viciously. Pung! Ming Di was sent flying once again. His body tore a huge rift in the cosmos. Seal! Yi Shiwen shouted. Countless nomological laws froze at his command. The seal nomological laws sealed off the surrounding space. Ming Di tried to take advantage of this opportunity to escape, but he was also sealed. Yi Shiwen let out a long howl and charged forward once again. His attacks were completely berserk. The series of attacks just now had severely injured Ming Di and aggravated his injuries. However, it wasn't enough to kill him in one go. It was too difficult to truly kill a sovereign emperor. It wasn't something that could be accomplished with one strike. It would take many strikes. But Ming Di had reconstructed himself and torn apart Yi Shiwen's seal. Yi Shiwen was a sovereign emperor and could command the nomological laws. Ming Di was also a sovereign emperor and naturally could do the same. It wasn't surprising. Ming Di stared at his battered body as he retreated. He waved his halberd to block Yi Shiwen's next attack and tried to recover some of his cultivation. However, he suddenly realized that it was useless. Yi Shiwen's berserk attacks had completely destroyed the balance in his body. He could no longer suppress the Dao injuries in his body. The injuries caused by the Lord of the Underworld all those years ago had finally begun to take his life. Ming Di's lips curled into a self-deprecating smile. In the end, it's still you who will take my life? My old friend. No, who do you think I am? I will never submit to anyone. No one can take my life. Ming Di roared. His eyes were bloodshot and he glared at Yi Shiwen like a wounded beast. Yi Shiwen, you will regret forcing me to this extent. No one can force me to this extent without paying a price. And that price is your life. You can try. Yi Shiwen's expression was still cold. However, he stopped his berserk attack. He knew that his plan had succeeded. He had affected the Dao injuries in Ming Di's body. All that was left was to watch Ming Di self-combust and die from his own injuries. The only thing he had to be careful of was Ming Di's counterattack. It could be said that the Lord of Underworld had perished many years ago. However, his actions were still influencing the current world. Therefore, it was possible for Yi Shiwen to kill Underworld Emperor. 10 moves. Yi Shiwen, I can finish you off in 10 moves. If I can't finish you off, I will kill myself. Ming Di roared. After 10 moves? Can you still hold on until then? Yi Shiwen could see Ming Di's final frenzy and the weakness in his bones. Yes, 10 moves. I won't be able to hold on until then. Ming Di could feel the speed at which his internal injuries were worsening. It was terrifying. Countless years had passed. Ever since he had proven his Tao, his life had never been threatened. Ever since he became an emperor, no one had been able to threaten him. He was an emperor. Who could threaten an emperor? At this moment, he felt that death, which he had chased away, was approaching him once again. Even an emperor could not escape the fate of death. Only by mastering fate could one transcend. He couldn't help but think of the legend that had been passed down among the emperors. His pursuits were nothing in the face of fate. They were meaningless. Perhaps in that instant, he regretted his actions. Perhaps he shouldn't have been driven by greed to launch a sneak attack on the master of the underworld. But he was an emperor after all. Even though he was afraid of dying, he had had enough of living for so many years. At this moment, the Netherworld Emperor, who had been trying to prolong his existence, was gone. The invincible great emperor who had once called the wind and summoned the rain, who had fought with many rulers of the world of the living, had returned. In an instant, his lofty ambitions were awakened. Even if he was going to die, he wanted to die a glorious death. Besides, I might not die. Yi Shiwen, your plan is too good. Ming Di roared. Things in this world aren't as perfect as you think. Do you think I haven't thought of this? You want to kill me within 10 moves, and then swallow my sovereign source. Not only will you be able to recover from your injuries, but you'll also be able to reach a higher level. I've heard of this secret technique. Yi Shiwen didn't panic. All of this was within his plans. There were no secrets between him and Yi Qianqian. He had learned a lot of information about the Underworld Master's inheritance from Yi Qianqian, including the secret technique that Ming Di had obtained in his early years. Although it was an incomplete secret technique that had severe side effects and could even affect their Tao foundations, it was still an extremely powerful and strange secret technique. As for where Ming Di had obtained this secret technique, it was not mentioned in the inheritance of the Lord of the Underworld. However, ever since it had obtained this secret technique, Ming Di had been like a madman, constantly lobbying the Lord of the Underworld to join forces with it to deal with the rulers outside. If it could kill 1 or 2 rulers and devour their essence, it would be equivalent to countless years of cultivation. It would save them countless years of time. But the Underworld Master wasn't crazy. Naturally, he wouldn't agree to this idea. There were only 2 of them at most. There were so many emperors outside. If they were discovered, they would face the crazy revenge of the emperors outside. They wouldn't even know how they died. Regarding this issue, even the celestial race and the allied forces of the various races would join forces to eliminate them. After all, no one wanted to become food in the eyes of others. Not to mention the emperors, who were the strongest and noblest existences in the world, couldn't bear it. But the Underworld Master hadn't expected that the crazy Ming Di would actually target him. Even though the Underworld Master had self-immolated before he died and didn't leave any for Ming Di, it was still a reminder to Yi Shiwen. This was already within Yi Shiwen's calculations. I didn't expect you to have heard of the heaven patching technique. But it's useless. Even if you knew, you would still die. Chapter 2968. I didn't expect you to have heard of the heaven patching technique. But it's useless. You'll still die even if you know about it. Ming Di roared and chanted an ancient and cryptic incantation, forcibly suppressing his injuries. But he only had 10 moves left. This was his limit. If he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen within this time frame, the consequences would be unimaginable. At that time, he would truly fall. Obscure laws began to appear around his body. His entire forehead and upper dantian were glowing, and his yuan shern and body were tightly fusing together. And at this moment, Yi Shiwen made another decisive move. His blood energy surged like raging waves, completely igniting the starry sky. He alone was like the entire universe. Yi Shiwen was like a ferocious beast as he charged forward, smashing everything in his path. he soared up into the sky and attacked Ming Di. At this moment, Yi Shiwen's secret techniques were stimulated to the extreme. There wasn't a single part of his body that wasn't a secret technique. All kinds of secret techniques were completely integrated into his body at this moment to form a fatal blow. Boom! There was a violent collision. The terrifying sound shook the entire world. The Avicii sword and the halberd shook violently. Yi Shiwen's time robe and Ming Di's underworld sacred robe were both shaking violently. Sparks flew everywhere. These weren't ordinary sparks. They were the laws of the great Tao on both of their bodies. At this moment, they had completely fused together and burst forth. Both of their Daos were devouring each other at this moment. It was another fierce collision. Ming Di took a few steps back and coughed up large mouthfuls of blood. He wasn't in peak condition after all. He was still injured. In addition, he had used all his strength to fight Yi Shiwen and didn't have any strength to suppress his injuries. Hence, he suffered a huge loss in one blow. His old injuries relapsed. Fresh blood turned into a bloody mist. It was a ghastly sight in the starry sky. Boom! Yi Shiwen was instantly blasted away. One could well imagine the power of a Fourth Realm expert's all-out attack. The barrier of the power of time around Yi Shiwen's chrono robe collapsed in an instant, and all the power poured into Yi Shiwen's body in one breath. That dreadful power didn't manage to break the chrono magic robe in the end. However, the power of the vibrations was already dreadful enough. Yi Shiwen's blood and energy were violently surging within his body, and he could see stars in front of his eyes. The strength of a veteran Fourth Realm cultivator was indeed powerful enough. He was right not to rashly charge into the Netherworld Kingdom 10,000 years ago. At that time, he was only at the peak of the First Realm. Even if he had the protection of the Robe of Time, he could only suffer a great loss and escape when there was a huge difference in power between them. When a person was forced into a desperate situation, they would erupt with unimaginable potential, let alone a sovereign emperor. This collision had evaporated a large amount of blood essence from Yi Shiwen's body. It could be said that no one gained the upper hand in this attack, and both sides were injured. When that happened, neither side would give up just like that. This was also Ming Di's only chance to defeat Yi Shiwen. If he were in his original state, he would be slowly ground to death by Yi Shiwen. But for Yi Shiwen, as long as he could withstand 10 moves, Ming Di would collapse without a fight. This unparalleled battle was finally coming to an end, and he would also be able to get rid of a potential threat. Blood was still flowing. Ming Di gritted his teeth and crushed the blood stains in his mouth. He was still activating his secret technique, and his battle strength continued to rise. The halberd in his hand continued to attack Yi Shiwen without pause. Yi Shiwen could afford to wait, but Ming Di couldn't. Severely injure him. I must severely injure him. Only then can I kill him. Ming Di only had this thought in his mind. This was the only way for him to successfully devour Yi Shiwen's sovereign emperor source. Otherwise, it would be impossible to achieve. All right, come again, Yi Shiwen roared. Countless energies in the surroundings were absorbed into his body, whether it was spirit energy or death energy. There was no difference between all energies for him. He could use all of them. The only difference was the efficiency of utilization. Therefore, an Emperor Realm expert could survive in the primal chaos. Yi Shiwen roared. As he absorbed a large amount of energy, Yi Shiwen's internal injuries were almost healed in an instant. He waved the 6 paths of reincarnation fist, and the heavens and earth rumbled. The sun, moon, and stars were resonating, radiating brilliance. All the living beings in the world seemed to have borrowed his strength in an instant, and he punched out. Behind the 6 paths of reincarnation fist, billions of living beings appeared in an instant, and they all rushed towards Ming Di. At this stage, Yi Shiwen was able to utilize the fist intent that he didn't have before, and he was able to comprehend his own domain. Ming Di, no matter what tricks you have up your sleeves, you won't escape death today. Yi Shiwen roared as he pounced forward. With the 6 paths of reincarnation fist as a precursor, a fist that seemed to be able to shatter the entire universe swept out, and it slammed towards Ming Di. Boom! This attack was even more terrifying than the previous one. Both parties had unleashed even more power, and everything came to a standstill in that instant. It was as if time had stopped, but the standstill was only for a moment. Following that, the crowd saw 2 balls of horrifying explosion light spreading in all directions, engulfing the 2 of them. It directly destroyed half of the netherworld realm. Even though they were separated by a great distance, the aftermath of the explosion was still too terrifying. Even though they weren't directly affected, just the terrifying pressure alone was enough to cause the weaker members of the 2 armies to spit out a mouthful of blood, and they were instantly severely injured. Even some of the quasi-emperor powerhouses were affected. They only felt their vision go black, and then an endless amount of energy swept towards them. In an instant, the entire battlefield began to hurriedly put up protective barriers, resurrection formations, and use them to withstand the aftermath of the battle between the 2. No one had expected that things would turn out like this. They had resurrected their formations to kill their opponents, but now they had to consider how to protect themselves. The 2 armies stopped fighting at almost the same time, because they realized that in a battle of this magnitude, whether they wanted to admit it or not, they had to admit that they couldn't control the outcome of the battle. If they were to fight to the death at this point, they might as well wait for the outcome of the battle to be decided before making a decision. Moreover, it wouldn't take long. The battle between Yi Shiwen and Ming Di had been witnessed by everyone, and their conversation had naturally been heard. 10 moves to decide the outcome. In the blink of an eye, 2 moves had already been exchanged. The 2 emperors had already staked their lives. This was going to be a battle that would dazzle for countless years to come. Once the outcome of the battle between the 2 emperors was decided, everything would be decided. Would the allied forces of the various heavens and realms be able to annihilate the Netherworld Kingdom, or would the Netherworld Kingdom be able to flip the table and turn the tables? Everyone's eyes were fixated on the 2 people fighting in the sky. At this point, the 2 sides had already exchanged several moves. The battle was intense, and each exchange was more terrifying than the last. The entire sky was boiling, and the ordinary creatures of the Netherworld Kingdom who weren't protected were already screaming in pain as they were blasted into pieces by the waves of attacks. Soon, the 2 sides had exchanged 7 moves. At this point, both sides could be said to have given it their all. Ming Di's underworld Dao Saint robe was also soaked in blood. It wasn't someone else's blood, but his own. The golden color was extremely dazzling under the radiant. His breathing was incomparably heavy, as if he would collapse at any moment. The injuries on his body were getting more and more severe, and they were increasing at an alarming rate. The longer the fight went on, the more severe his injuries became, until they were so severe that they could take his life. This was an exponential increase. Yi Shiwen wasn't much better off either. The time robe on his body had already lost its luster. In these few moves, it had suffered unimaginable damage. If it was an ordinary divine tool, it wouldn't even be able to withstand a single move. It would have been completely destroyed. But the time robe had withstood the attacks. Even so, Yi Shiwen's skin had cracked. His entire body was like porcelain, densely packed with cracks. At this point in the battle, Yi Shiwen had given it his all. Even his Phoenix regeneration technique couldn't keep up with this rate of consumption. Although they had exchanged 7 moves, everything had actually happened in a very short period of time. It was so fast that even the Phoenix regeneration technique couldn't keep up. Right now, Yi Shiwen was fighting Ming Di with all his might. He was at his peak, and Ming Di's injuries couldn't be healed. This was his greatest advantage. Ha ha ha, 7 moves have passed. Ming Di, you're only SOSO. Yi Shiwen laughed heartily. He extended his arms and pounced on Ming Di again. All the pressure on him didn't seem to exist at all. Ming-Di looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. Perhaps this was the only place on his body that wasn't bleeding from his injuries. At this point, he had completely let go of life and death. At this point, there was no point in clinging to life and death. As long as he could kill Yi Shiwen, he would survive. If he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen, he would die. His life and death weren't up to him. It was up to Yi Shiwen. It had been a long time since he had encountered a situation where he couldn't even control his own life and death. Looks like I can't wait for 10 moves. 1 move, I'll finish you off in 1 move. Ming-Di had already gone mad. Every move he made was depleting his own life. He was waiting for death. This feeling had worn down his patience to its limits. 1 move. Whether he lived or died would be decided in this 1 move. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to have been flipped over. The nomological laws were fluctuating violently like the waters of a lake. This 1 move had shocked the heavens and earth. Chapter 2969. Countless nomological laws rained down, destroying everything in their path. Yi Shiwen's vision was obstructed by this endless rain of nomological laws. He couldn't even see Ming-Di's movements, but he knew that this was the most critical moment. He let out a long roar and the time divine kingdom spread out. His 10,000 years of planning was completely destroyed at this moment. The enlightening mind ancient tree appeared behind Yi Shiwen. All sorts of nomological martial arts hung from it like fruit. Yi Shiwen also fully displayed his great Tao. Boom! A terrifying attack broke through the sky curtain and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in the blink of an eye when everything was submerged in the heavy rain. Bang! It was an earth-shattering collision. The terrifying power shattered everything in an instant. No one could imagine how terrifying this attack was. It was like the creation of a new era. The heavens and earth were split apart, and the earth, fire, water, and wind were reforged. Everything was turned back into chaos, and the heavens and earth were split apart. Puff! Yi Shiwen was completely drowned by this attack. He didn't even have time to dodge because the surrounding space had been completely sealed. As if he had been struck by lightning, this attack severely injured him. He spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the strongest attack Ming-Di could unleash after burning his blood essence. He could even hear the sound of the time robe's defenses collapsing. Rumble! He forcibly withstood this fatal blow. The power on his body felt like it was going to tear apart all his flesh and blood. This power was too terrifying. Yi Shiwen didn't know how much time had passed before the attack finally dissipated completely. His flesh and blood began to regenerate. His face was a little pale. Ming-Di's attack was indeed terrifying. Even though he had made ample preparations, he was still severely injured. The nomological laws around him had turned into a rain of light. These nomological laws also turned into a rain of light in an instant. In front of him, Ming-Di seemed to have recovered. He sat cross-legged in front of him, his expression extremely calm. But Yi Shiwen could feel that his life force was rapidly draining away. He didn't have much time left. Yi Shiwen's injuries were almost healed within a few breaths. However, he had fought against a fourth realm sovereign emperor and had injured his foundation. He needed to go back and recuperate for a period of time before he could fully recover. Yi Shiwen slowly walked in front of Ming-Di and looked at the man who used to be his greatest opponent. He used to be a thorn in his side. In the end, you still won. Emperor Ming spoke slowly. His voice was much calmer now, no longer filled with endless hostility. Perhaps you are right. This is your era. Ming-Di raised his eyelids and looked at Yi Shiwen. Scenes of his life flashed before his eyes. Everything froze on the day he ambushed the Lord of Hell. From that day onward, everything began to change. No, perhaps he had already changed before that. From the moment he obtained the heaven-mending art, his heart was filled with evil thoughts. When he began to be unable to control the evil thoughts in his heart, everything had already been decided. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Do you still remember? I've said it before. One day, I will flatten the Netherworld Kingdom. Yi Shiwen said lightly as he sat down. This was a sign of respect for this former opponent. Perhaps he wasn't worthy of respect, but the respect he showed to other sovereign emperors was a form of respect for himself. Back then, I only treated it as the ignorant and arrogant words of an ant. Who would have thought that in just a short span of 10,000 years, it would all become a reality? Ming Di sighed. He had been tense his entire life. Perhaps it was only at this moment that he could finally relax a little. If I said that all of this was within my expectations, would you believe me? Yi Shiwen said slowly. Ming Di looked at Yi Shiwen. Although he didn't say anything, it was clear that he didn't believe him. Sovereign emperors claimed to be omniscient and omnipotent, but in reality, they all knew what was going on. It was impossible for them to truly be omniscient and omnipotent. Even if they wanted to predict the future, they could only predict some minor things. It was impossible for them to see everything. Yi Shiwen smiled faintly. Perhaps many people wouldn't believe this. If he was in Ming Di's shoes, he might not believe it either. However, what he said was the truth. This was because he had already prepared himself. Either he would be killed by DNI before he became a sovereign, or he would kill DNI and flatten the Netherworld Kingdom after he became a sovereign. There were only these two possibilities. That was why he said that all of this was within his expectations. In fact, before he went to battle, he had already simulated it countless times. He had considered all of the possibilities, and this was one of them. Ordinary people definitely wouldn't be able to do this. However, Yi Shiwen was like a supercomputer right now. He had memorized everything in his mind. The world is unpredictable. Even sovereign emperors can't say that they can understand everything. I didn't expect this to be my fate either. Ming Di said faintly. When he was on the brink of death, he had come to terms with it. All of his struggles were futile. All of this has already been decided, Yi Shiwen said. If Ming Di hadn't ambushed the Lord of Underworld, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Although fate seemed unpredictable, it had already been decided. Yes, perhaps it has already been decided from the start, Ming Di sighed. Emperor Hades' body began to turn transparent as the nomological laws around him began to dissipate. Golden rain began to fall from the sky, as if weeping for the passing of an emperor. Emperor Qin, I'll tell you one last thing. Be careful of that person. I don't need to say it. You should know who I'm talking about. Ming Di said faintly. When a man is about to die, his words are kind. When a bird is about to die, its cry is sorrowful. The reason why I was able to obtain the heaven-patching art back then was because of him. I've always suspected that he has been watching this world from behind the scenes all these years. He wants to control the course of this world. Although I don't want to admit it, perhaps I've really fallen into his trap. I've become his pawn. I hope you can escape from this fate. As soon as Ming Di's voice fell, his entire body turned into a ball of light and disappeared without a trace. Yi Shiwen was silent. He didn't say anything. However, his heart was on full alert. What kind of person was Ming Di? To think that he had been schemed against and used. It seemed like the strength of the person behind him was far beyond everyone's imagination. He was extraordinarily powerful and powerful. These were all major problems that he would have to face in the future. Chapter 2970. The fall of Ming Di caused a huge uproar in the entire Netherworld Kingdom. The Netherworld Kingdom was a kingdom created by Ming Di and was connected to him everywhere. Following his fall, many parts of the Netherworld Kingdom began to collapse. Without the restraints of the laws of the underworld, these forcefully condensed worlds were like landslides and tsunamis. However, such a collapse only lasted for a short period of time because Yi Shiwen stabilized the world and protected the world's origin core. So, the world naturally couldn't continue to collapse. His Majesty has died. His Majesty has fallen. Oh my God! The experts of the Netherworld Kingdom were all scared silly. For countless years, Ming-Di had been both benevolent and menacing. It was like a shadow that was deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. It could be said that no matter how strong an expert was, they all had to submit under the pressure of Ming-Di. An emperor was an emperor after all, and a quasi-emperor was just a quasi-emperor. The relationship between the emperor and his subjects had long been established, and the difference in strength between them was like heaven and earth. Even though Ming-Di was recuperating from serious injuries, his strength was still not something these quasi-emperors could fathom. Therefore, in their hearts, Ming-Di was like a god. In the end, such a person had died, and in front of them at that. Such a blow was like the collapse of the heavens and the earth. It was incomparably terrifying. Even though they were fighting against another emperor, they had already prepared for the worst. After all, Ming-Di was an incomparably powerful emperor. There was no need to mention how powerful he was. However, they still found it hard to accept. Soon, they calmed down and fought to the death. They knew very well that they would be annihilated in this battle. Since they were going to die anyway, why not fight to the death? Almost all of them had died once. At this point, there was nothing to be afraid of. In a moment, battle cries rang out everywhere. As for the allied forces of the various races, their morale was greatly boosted. Yi Shiwen had killed Ming-Di. They could only win this battle. For them, the benefits were obvious, especially since Yi Shiwen had taken notice of them. A reigning great sage would have a limitless future. Moreover, Yi Shiwen wasn't biased. He didn't let the Divine Court's army hide in a safe place. On the contrary, the Divine Court's army was led by Yi Mo and Yi Qianqian. They were rushing to the front line. So, they couldn't say anything about this. For a moment, one side was determined to die, while the other side's morale was high. They immediately began to fight crazily, giving it their all. Yi Shiwen didn't care about these things. The underworld Dao Saint robe and Ming-Di's dark dragon halberd were in his hands. They were struggling in his hands. Ming-Di had fallen, but his spirit was still trying to escape from Yi Shiwen's hands. What kind of skill did Yi Shiwen have now? In the absence of a master, Yi Shiwen could easily wipe out the primordial spirits of these two great Dao tools with just a casual swipe. Yi Shiwen imprinted a part of his spirit imprint into the dark dragon halberd, making it his own. For him, with his current cultivation, whether or not he had the dark dragon halberd was no longer that important. However, after all, it would increase the number of emperors in the Divine Court. The truly powerful emperors in the world didn't just have one Dao tool. For example, the Heavenly Court, Martial Sect, Emperor Clan, Ji Family, and so on. The more Dao tools they had, the more profound their foundation would be. The remaining underworld Dao Saint robe turned into a stream of light with a wave of Yi Shiwen's hand. It flew towards Yi Qianqian, and she put it on her body. Suddenly, with the power of the underworld Dao Saint robe, Yi Qianqian's strength was guaranteed. She killed a quasi-emperor of the Netherworld Kingdom in front of her on the spot. This quasi-emperor could have fought with Yi Qianqian for a while, but he was instantly killed when the underworld Dao Saint robe arrived. The underworld Dao Saint robe was like a fish in water in an environment like the Netherworld Kingdom, and could display extraordinary strength. Moreover, with the protection of the underworld Dao Saint robe, Yi Qianqian didn't need to care about other attacks. She directly killed her way into the group of experts of the Netherworld Kingdom. She was the successor of the Lord of Underworld, so she could easily control the underworld Dao Saint robe and display invincible strength. In addition to him, Hua Menghan, who was wearing the phoenix robe, was also very eye-catching. She flew high up in the sky like a fire phoenix, and all the strong enemies in front of her were burned to ashes. The experts of the Netherworld Kingdom tried their best to resist the attack of the allied forces of the various heavens and realms, but they couldn't do anything. Their defensive line was quickly broken, and they suffered heavy losses. It was naturally impossible for the Netherworld Kingdom to resist the attack of the allied forces of the various heavens and realms with the strength of a single country. Their only hope was that the Underworld Emperor could defeat Yi Shiwen. However, since the Underworld Emperor had already fallen, they naturally didn't have any hope. Even so, the experts of the Netherworld Kingdom who were stubbornly resisting still brought great damage to the allied forces of the various races, especially since a steady stream of experts had been revived. Many of them were the senior experts of the allied forces, and they were now engaged in an earth-shattering battle. This battle lasted for 3 years. After 3 years, the allied forces of the various races finally killed all the experts of the Netherworld Kingdom in the Netherworld Kingdom. Although a small number of them had escaped before the army had marched into the Netherworld, they were destined to be unable to pose too much of a threat. At this point, the Netherworld Kingdom, which had been passed down from ancient times, had shaken the heavens and realms, and had even dominated the heavens and realms for a period of time, had been completely annihilated. Everything had vanished without a trace like a fleeting cloud. Even an emperor had no power to fight back in the face of the mighty power of time. This was the fate of the Netherworld. The destruction of the Netherworld Kingdom had naturally greatly increased Yi Shiwen's Underworld Emperor status. Ever since he had become an emperor, he had successively defeated 3 Emperor level experts. It could be said that there weren't many emperors who were as powerful as him since ancient times, let alone the Emperor Taiping in the era of peace. Yi Shiwen's title of martial emperor had spread throughout the entire heavens and the 10,000 worlds. They felt that Yi Shiwen's strength was boundless. In fact, some people had even crowned Yi Shiwen as one of the strongest emperors since the ancient times. They didn't know the difference between the strength of the emperors, so they could only judge based on their own battle records. Many emperors had never defeated other emperors in their entire lives. Yi Shiwen had only been on the throne for more than 10,000 years, and he had already defeated 3 emperors. Wasn't this enough to explain some problems? Under Yi Shiwen's leadership, the development of the Divine Palace had once again entered the fast lane. It had truly achieved the point where no one dared to provoke them. Although the Divine Palace didn't really go out to cause trouble many times, it could be said that they didn't cause trouble, but they weren't afraid of trouble either. Even without the support of an emperor like Yi Shiwen, the current Divine Palace also had the power to protect itself. Among the many emperors' inheritances, it could still be ranked at the top. Following that, Yi Shiwen didn't appear. Instead, he entered into a state of closed-door cultivation. This battle was also a great harvest for Yi Shiwen, especially since he had to completely refine the Netherworld Dragon Halberd and help Yi Qianqian refine the Underworld Dao Holy Robe. Of course, he had found many works left behind by the Underworld Emperor in the Netherworld Kingdom, which involved many emperors' great Dao. For Yi Shiwen, he had also benefited a lot. This was because the Underworld Emperor had indeed reached unimaginable heights in this aspect, especially the Tao of life and death. This was not the direction that Yi Shiwen was good at. Naturally, Yi Shiwen couldn't learn from the Underworld Emperor, but it was more than enough for him to use as a reference. This closed-door cultivation lasted for a full 10,000 years. Spring passed and autumn came. 10,000 years disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. This world had entered the second 10,000 years of the martial emperor calendar. Yi Shiwen did not pay attention to the affairs of the world while he was in closed-door cultivation. However, his reputation did not weaken along with it. On the contrary, as the new generation grew up, his power continued to grow. This was because the new generation had almost all grown up listening to Yi Shiwen's various godlike achievements. For them, Yi Shiwen was naturally the strongest person in the world. This was without a doubt. Even many tribes and clans worshipped Yi Shiwen and prayed sincerely. In these years, more and more tribes surrendered to the Divine Palace. It wasn't like the original situation where only a few people came to surrender to the divine palace. Instead, tribes surrendered to the divine palace one by one. This made the divine palace stronger and stronger. In reality, when the heavenly court was in power, countless demon race tribes obeyed the heavenly court. Even after the heavenly court had declined, many tribes were still willing to listen to Yiwudi's call. This was the foundation. And now, such a foundation was gradually taking shape in the divine palace. After entering the second 10,000 years, the new generation of masters in the divine palace also came forth in large numbers. Just the divine palace alone occupied 1/3 of the famous new generation masters in the world. Just this one alone was able to compete with the many emperor inheritances in the world. Many of the older generation sighed with emotion. Now that the heavenly Tao was in Yi Shiwen's hands, the divine palace would prosper. This was not only because Yi Shiwen's prestige made many genius seeds willing to join the divine palace. At the same time, it was also a kind of reward from the heavens for Yi Shiwen's position and guarding the world. It allowed the divine palace to produce many geniuses. What was this? This was destiny. The other emperor inheritances had records. When their emperor inheritances were in power, it was also when their emperor inheritances produced the most geniuses. What was the trend of the general trend? This was the trend of the general trend. And after these 10,000 years, Yi Shiwen finally came out again. And the first thing he did after coming out was to issue a decree. He announced that he would hold a large-scale lecture within 100 years. This time, in addition to those above the quasi-emperor level, all the geniuses on the list of the divine palace could come and listen to the lecture. Even if their strength had not yet reached the emperor realm, they could also come and listen to the lecture. As soon as this news came out, there was an immediate uproar. It was like boiling water, instantly boiling. Chapter 2971. All the heavens and realms were in an uproar because of Yi Shiwen's decree. Yi Shiwen was going to preach in person, regardless of faction or race. This was a precious opportunity, because there had been no emperor in the world for too long. The last time someone had the opportunity to listen to an emperor's preaching was a long, long time ago. Moreover, since ancient times, emperors often preached in their own sections. They rarely gathered the heroes of the world to preach for them. This was tantamount to training competitors, especially for those quasi-emperors who were not born in the emperor's inheritance. This was a huge pie in the sky. Without this opportunity, they might not have the opportunity to listen to an emperor's preaching in their lifetime. What kind of figure was an emperor? He could be said to be the most tyrannical figure in the world. Their preaching was all about the Great Way. Listening to an emperor's preaching was equivalent to riding on a rocket of cultivation. Such a situation was not uncommon. It was not that Yi Shiwen did not preach in the past, but it was limited to the divine court. The emergence of experts in the divine court in recent years was largely related to this. Now that Yi Shiwen was obviously going to benefit the heroes of the world, many people could not help but be tempted. And many divine kings were even more frustrated. They almost reached the threshold of listening to Yi Shiwen's preaching. Except for those geniuses who were specially named, the others were experts above the quasi-emperor realm. As for whether someone would not come, it was absolutely impossible. Even if a quasi-emperor who was in closed-door training heard this news, he would probably jump out of his closed-door training. For a quasi-emperor, there were not many opportunities to listen to an emperor's preaching. Especially those young geniuses who were named, many of them had emerged in the past 10,000 years. They originally had supreme worship for Yi Shiwen, and at this time, being named by Yi Shiwen was even more of an honor. What an honor it was to be personally named by an emperor. But when many experts of the older generation heard this news, they were not happy at first, but sighed with emotion. The martial emperor's great momentum has been formed, The great momentum has been formed. Someone sighed with emotion. The martial emperor has spread the great Tao all over the world. He clearly has a card up his sleeve. Even if others become martial emperors, they may not be a threat to him. This is true power. Since ancient times, there have not been many who could sit on the fishing platform. This is true power. Not only has the martial emperor's influence been established, but even the divine court's influence has been established. The martial emperor has spread the great path everywhere. In this way, many people will be indebted to him. This is a favor, a karma. Mortals can ignore this karma, but cultivators like us have to repay the karma we owe. Otherwise, we will be in big trouble sooner or later. Many people could see that these world's prideful geniuses and top-notch big shots had obtained benefits from Yi Shiwen. So, they wouldn't need to help the divine court in the future if they were to encounter any problems. However, this favor alone was enough for the divine court to prosper for a long time. No foundation could compare to Yi Shiwen's favor, especially at the moment when the confinement period was coming to an end. Yi Shiwen's sermon might directly give birth to 1 or 2 emperors. If this was the case, the new emperor would also owe Yi Shiwen a favor. With this favor as a foundation, the divine court would be as stable as Mount Tai. This was the fundamental reason why the divine court's great momentum had been formed. The martial emperor's plan is far-reaching. It's really not something we can guess. But even so, knowing that we will owe him a favor, how many people will let go of such an opportunity? Many people sighed. They clearly knew that they would owe Yi Shiwen a huge favor. However, no one would give up such an opportunity since it was related to becoming an emperor. After all, who knew if they wouldn't be able to hear the Great Way this time? Wouldn't that mean that they wouldn't be able to become emperor? For a time, the entire heavens and realms were discussing about Yi Shiwen's sermon. The emperor's sermon was bound to be a major event. Everyone in the divine court had to prepare for it. 100 years might be a lifetime for mortals. However, for many powerhouses who had already achieved immortality, it was just a snap of the fingers. It was nothing. After Yi Shiwen came out of the closed-door training, he spent most of his time with his family. As for the sermon, it was naturally prepared by the other people in the divine court. "Daddy, Daddy!" A crisp voice sounded in Yi Shiwen's ears. A little thing climbed on Yi Shiwen's body. If it was someone else, they naturally wouldn't have such courage to climb on the martial emperor's body. However, this person was Yi Shiwen's daughter, Little Crescent Moon. Even after tens of thousands of years, Little Crescent Moon looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old. It seemed that she hadn't grown up at all. Even Yi Shiwen was very puzzled about this. It should be known that even for super long-lived races like the Dragon Clan, 10,000 years was enough for them to reach adulthood. At the very least, they would have the appearance of a teenager. However, Little Crescent Moon was still in the appearance of a child. However, no matter how he checked, he couldn't find any problems. In the end, he could only give up. He couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Although Little Crescent Moon was his bloodline, and it was only after he became a martial emperor, it could be said that her status and bloodline were unspeakably noble. However, this was a little too strange. This also made him a little depressed. With his status and cultivation, there were actually things that even he couldn't understand. It was simply completely unscientific. The situation of Little Crescent Moon even alarmed Yemo and others. Yi Shiwen had specially looked for the inheritance of various great emperor for this. He had read a lot of information, but he didn't find anything useful. Finally, he found a similar case in an ancient book of Yi Wudi's heavenly court. In a distant era there was a person like this. His growth was super slow, but when he was born, he was already a super master that shocked the world. That person looked a bit similar to Little Crescent Moon. He couldn't find any specific reason, but his growth was very slow. When he really reached adulthood, he was already a quasi-emperor. However, this person didn't become an emperor in the end. He was killed halfway, so no one knew about it. It was only recorded in the ancient books of the ancient heavenly court. And this record was left by the demon emperor himself. The era when this person appeared was the era when the demon emperor was on the throne. According to the demon emperor, if it wasn't for his early death, this person would almost certainly become an emperor. Because according to the speculation of the demon emperor, this person was by no means an ordinary bloodline. He was like the Son of Heaven, the heavenly child that had appeared in ancient legends. When he was born, there was the infusion of the Great Way. It could be said that he was unspeakably noble. However, since ancient times, such people were very rare. There were almost none who could really grow to the end. This kind of person would experience all kinds of hardships in his life. If he survived, he would become the world's supreme. If he couldn't, he would also die young. Yi Shiwen wasn't sure if Little Crescent Moon was the heavenly child recorded in the Demon Emperor's ancient book. But he had to be on guard, because if this was the case, Little Crescent Moon's life would be very difficult. For his daughter's sake, he couldn't really be indifferent. Over the years, he had put in a lot of effort in this area. Apart from personally refining a quasi-Dao level armor for Little Crescent Moon, he had also refined the Nether Dragon halberd he had obtained from Emperor Hades into Little Crescent Moon's body. No one knew about this except Yi Shiwen. This arrangement seemed to be useless now, but it might be able to save her life at a critical moment in the future. Although the quasi-Taoist level armor was only a quasi-Taoist level armor, the materials used to refine it were no different from a Dao artifact. The only difference was that Yi Shiwen's great Dao laws were not integrated into it. Therefore, it could only be a quasi-Taoist level armor. Even so, its defensive power was very astonishing. It could withstand a fatal blow from an Imperial Lord. With these two arrangements, in addition to Little Crescent Moon's status as the Princess of the Divine Court, who would dare touch her? Yi Shiwen believed that even if it was the so-called Mandate of Heaven, who was plagued with calamities in his life, these arrangements would be enough. Furthermore, with him around, there would naturally be no problems. Yi Shiwen smiled as he carried the little fellow down. The little fellow grew up very slowly. Yi Shiwen was in seclusion all year round, so he did not see her often. However, the little fellow stuck close to him. It made Dawn, as a mother, extremely envious. However, Yi Shiwen knew that apart from the relationship of bloodline, this little guy should be closer to his Great Way origin. The Great Way origin of the Emperor realm could be said to be extremely pure. For this little guy who only acted on instinct, it had a great attraction. After teasing the little fellow for a while, Dawn came in. Another 10,000 years had passed, but she did not change much. However, the accumulation of time made her even more charming. "All right, carry the little fellow away first. I'm going out to preach the Tao. This time, I will really lay a foundation for my divine court that will last for eternity." Yi Shiwen carried the little fellow and, ignoring her unwillingness, handed her over to Dawn. Dawn looked at the reluctant Little Crescent Moon and could not help but frown slightly. She gently patted the little fellow and said, "What an ingrate. Mommy is usually so good to you, but all you care about is sticking to your daddy. Seriously? Mommy, hee." When the little fellow saw Yi Shiwen's figure vanish, she immediately turned her gaze back and let out a bell-like laughter. She wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, clearly looking extremely happy. The unhappiness and reluctance from before had long vanished. That was probably the nature of a child. Just like the weather in June, it changed at a whim. And on the other end, Yi Shiwen had vanished. When he appeared again, he was already on a bed of clouds in a gigantic hall. Not far away, many experts and elites were already in position. Upon seeing Yi Shiwen appear, everyone stood up and bowed. "Greetings, Martial Emperor. May the Martial Emperor live forever." Chapter 2972. Facing the only emperor in this world, everyone bowed their heads and paid their respects to him for being able to preach to everyone. Yi Shiwen glanced at the densely packed heads, and a sense of heroism suddenly rose in his heart. He wasn't just giving a lecture, but at the same time, it was also for the prosperity of martial arts in the heavens and the 10,000 worlds. Naturally, there were many benefits to this. Of course, the most important thing was that he was also establishing an indomitable foundation for the martial sect. Yi Shiwen did not say much nonsense and immediately began to preach. For a moment, the great way turned into golden lotuses that fell from the sky and directly fell into people's bodies. All of them were absorbed by people, and their comprehension increased greatly in an instant. This was the Great Way Golden Lotus that was unique to the Emperor's preaching. Every Great Way Golden Lotus contained a large number of Great Way laws, as well as Yi Shiwen's understanding of the Great Way. Almost as soon as the lotuses fell, some people began to advance. Some of the geniuses with shallow cultivation foundations received the greatest benefits at this time and began to advance on the spot. After a long time, there were various experts who were advancing everywhere. Apart from dividing a part of their spirit to listen to the preaching, most of their spirit was used to make use of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to improve themselves. The Emperor's preaching was not a good thing that could be encountered at any time. Yi Shiwen had been preaching for 300 years, and the whole world had been silent for 300 years. This was because the people who had come to listen to the preaching were undoubtedly the leaders of the various forces. So, the various forces had naturally quieted down since these people had come to listen to the preaching. Of course, in front of Yi Shiwen, they did not have the guts to make a move. For a moment, the myriad heavens and realms entered a rare state of peace. As Yi Shiwen preached, many doubts in his heart were resolved at the same time. He felt as if the heavenly way had relaxed its control over him. In this short period of 300 years, he felt that his cultivation had improved once again. After 300 years, Yi Shiwen disappeared. However, many people stayed where they were and made breakthroughs. In these 300 years, they obtained many benefits. Many people even advanced by more than one realm. Even those peak quasi-emperor experts obtained great benefit. Although they did not break through to martial emperor on the spot, there were still many benefits. Apart from these experts, the entire divine court had gained the most benefit. Yi Shiwen didn't try to hide his lecture. They could listen to Yi Shiwen's lecture as long as they were in the divine court. However, many disciples of the divine court had shallow cultivation. So, they couldn't understand it. Therefore, they could only forcibly memorize it and slowly digest it later. Even so, it was still a huge wealth that they couldn't exhaust. Yi Shiwen made some simple arrangements in the divine court after he had finished preaching to the experts from all over the heavens. Then, he left and entered the primal chaos alone. On the one hand, he needed to find more supreme divine materials. Whether it was Yi Qianqian, Hua Menghan, Yi Mo, or Yi Wudi, if they became emperors, they would need these divine materials to improve themselves. They could also search for it by themselves. However, Yi Shiwen could save them a lot of time if he could help them a little. On the other hand, Yi Shiwen was also looking for fortuitous encounters. According to his cultivation, if he continued to practice step by step, even if he was faster than the average person, the time needed was unbearable. Now, he had gradually touched the edge of the peak of the second realm, and this was because of the sermons. In these 300 years, he had also benefited greatly and saved himself tens of thousands of years of hard cultivation. After reaching this step, he realized that every step forward was calculated in tens of thousands of years. If he didn't find some ways to find some fortuitous encounters, the years of cultivation would be too long. What the demon emperor said in the past was probably because of this reason. In the primal chaos, there was no distinction between north, south, east, west, or even the concept of time and space. Everything was in the primal chaos. the terrifying primal chaos was not quiet. On the contrary, it was extremely violent. Relatively speaking, the formed worlds were much more stable. The earth, fire, water, and wind were also completely fixed. In this primal chaos, no one could move freely except the Emperor. Even the Emperor might encounter danger. However, there were too many treasures in this primal chaos. Even the Emperor couldn't help but explore it. Another 100 years had passed. Yi Shiwen didn't know how long he had been walking in the primal chaos. Perhaps he was walking along the path he came last time. So, he didn't encounter any divine materials or treasures along the way. After all, he didn't know how long it would take for the divine materials and treasures of that level to take shape. On this day, Yi Shiwen walked as usual while silently comprehending the law of the primal chaos. It was the origin of all things in the world, and the end of all the cultivation paths. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen sensed a kind of treasure light. It was transmitted to him through the primal chaos, and a strange fragrance hit his face. Yi Shiwen flew out quickly. With his speed, he still flew for 3 days and 3 nights before he finally flew to the source of this strange fragrance. This is... Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. In front of him, there was a huge tree. This big tree was shining with a kind of earthy yellow color. Even in the entire primal chaos, people could feel it. On this big tree there were already some ripe fruit. The bursts of strange fragrance came from these fruits. Needless to say, this big tree was naturally very magical. In fact, only the Emperor could walk freely in the primal chaos. Ordinary plants couldn't survive in the primal chaos at all. However, Yi Shiwen still had to confirm what kind of divine tree it was. After all, there were countless divine trees recorded since ancient times. Yi Shiwen flew under this divine tree and stretched out his hand to pat on the divine tree. After a long time, he finally opened his eyes. He finally knew what this divine tree was. This is the legendary yellow middle plum tree. Yi Shiwen was a little stunned. The legend of the yellow middle plum was seen in some legends. It was said that as long as ordinary people swallowed a plum from the yellow middle plum, they would ascend on the spot and become an immortal. However, someone had seen the yellow middle plum in a distant era. Yi Shiwen didn't expect to encounter it here. Moreover, it was a ripe yellow middle plum. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but be overjoyed. The effects of the middle yellow plum are even better than the legends say. Even with my cultivation, just a whiff of its aroma is enough to make my cultivation advance a little bit. If I were to swallow it, I'm afraid my cultivation would really advance a lot. Yi Shiwen counted. There were as many as 99 ripe plums on this yellow middle plum tree in front of him. This was enough to make Yi Shiwen's cultivation advance a notch higher. Yi Shiwen looked again. Only now did he understand why this yellow middle plum tree could survive in the primal chaos. It turned out that its rhizome was wrapped in a mass of 7-colored soil. Yi Shiwen also quickly saw that this mass of 7-colored soil was the legendary living soil. Moreover, it was the 7-colored living soil. According to the records in the ancient books, a legendary divine object like the living soil could evolve into a continent with just a little bit of it. Since ancient times, many emperors had used the living soil to create their own divine kingdoms. The rainbow life soil was a type of life soil that was even rarer and more precious than ordinary life soil. The only thing that was even more formidable than the rainbow life soil was the chaotic life soil that had only appeared in legends, but no one had actually seen it before. In the ancient myths and legends, someone had used the chaotic living soil to condense and create the world of the myriad world. That person was known as the Creator. However, that era was really too far away. Even in ancient inheritances like the Dragon Island and the ancient Phoenix world, these matters also existed as myths and legends. There was no actual evidence to prove that these legends were true. However, if this was really the case, Yi Shiwen didn't dare to imagine how strong that person's strength was. Even with his current cultivation, it was impossible to create such a huge world like the myriad worlds. Even if he was given the chaotic living soil, it would be useless. If he didn't have that strength, then he didn't have that strength. No wonder the yellow middle plum tree can survive and bear fruit. It turns out that it was contaminated by this piece of 7-colored living soil. So, the treasure light that I saw just now should be this piece of 7-colored living soil. Haha, the heavens are really helping me. Whether it was the yellow middle plum tree or the 7-colored living soil, they weren't ordinary heavenly treasures. Even a few ordinary divine materials couldn't compare to any one of them. Sure enough, I have a hunch that I will have a great harvest in the primal chaos this time. It seems like the proof is here, Yi Shiwen said with a smile. Yi Shiwen directly formed a big hand and grabbed towards the yellow middle plum tree. However, he saw that the yellow middle plum tree seemed to have sensed danger. It actually began to frantically escape into the distance. The law of space was activated in an instant. It wanted to teleport and escape. Naturally, it wasn't easy to capture such a heavenly treasure. If one wasn't a sovereign emperor-level expert, they wouldn't even have the qualifications to look at its back, let alone capturing the yellow middle plum tree. However, Yi Shiwen dared to make a move because he was already prepared. Seal! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. His words were followed by the law. Suddenly, the surrounding space was completely sealed. With Yi Shiwen's understanding of the law of space, it was naturally impossible for him to let the yellow middle plum tree escape. Trying to escape in front of me? You're displaying your slight skill in front of an expert. Yi Shiwen smiled as he looked at the yellow middle plum tree that was constantly bumping up and down in the sealed area. Just obtaining the yellow middle plum tree and the 7-colored living soil made this trip to the primal chaos worthwhile. Suddenly, a strange change occurred. A mountain-like mouth suddenly opened in the midst of the chaos, and directly pounced towards Yi Shiwen to bite him. Its speed was extremely fast. Bang! There was an incomparably loud collision sound. Yi Shiwen raised his hand and directly blasted towards this big bloody mouth. Chapter 2973. Bang! A loud sound was heard. That bloody mouth was finally repelled by Yi Shiwen. It revealed its true body at this time. It turned out to be a chaos python. It was unknown how many thousands of miles long it was in the chaos. Just its head was as huge as a mountain. Its entire body was unknown how many thousands of miles long it was. Even Yi Shiwen couldn't help but be slightly moved. Such a huge creature had actually grown in the chaos. Only the Emperor Lords could move freely in the chaos. However, this didn't mean that there weren't any other creatures. On the contrary, some of the creatures living in the chaos had even formed groups. Ordinary creatures of the chaos naturally couldn't pose any threat to Yi Shiwen given his cultivation. However, this chaos python was more than enough to deal with him. The attack of the Emperor Lords could collapse mountains, shatter stars, and collapse the world. However, this chaos python was able to withstand Yi Shiwen's attack. One could well imagine how powerful it was. Yi Shiwen would have thought of catching one if it weren't for the fact that it was a creature born in the primal chaos. It could be said that the strength of the divine court would have increased by a large margin out of thin air if such a powerful creature was keeping watch over it. Roar! The chaos python let out a shocking roar after it was repelled. The entire chaos was stirred up like the waves of the sea. It surged up and down, and layer after layer of waves crazily shook. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood that this python hadn't come at the right time. In fact, it should have been guarding this yellow middle plum for a long time if he wasn't mistaken. Heavenly treasures must be guarded by powerful creatures. This law was applicable even in the primal chaos. This chaos python could also sense Yi Shiwen's strength. Therefore, it was only roaring from afar. However, it obviously didn't want to give up on the yellow middle plum. It was just staring at it from afar. It seemed that it would attack once it had the chance. Bastard, you leave now. I won't harm your life. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite, Yi Shiwen said coldly. He had already sensed that many creatures with powerful auras were rushing over. It was unknown how many powerful creatures of the chaos had been born in this primal chaos. It was said that the 3,000 devil gods that had created the world were creatures that had lived in the primal chaos. After they had fallen in the creation of the world, they had been absorbed by the world and transformed into the 3,000 great Dao. Those legendary chaos demon gods even dared to challenge the Emperor Lords. They had the strength of the Emperor Lords. However, that was only a legend. After all, it was unknown how many years had passed since the creation of the world. Many things could only become legends. Even if this Chaos Python wasn't as powerful as the legendary Chaos Fiend Celestial, it wasn't much weaker. If it really swallowed the yellow middle plum, it would really attain the Tao and grow to an unimaginable level. Yi Shiwen immediately understood that he had become a calamity in the life of this Chaos Python. If he could overcome it, he would naturally become immeasurable. However, if he failed, he was afraid that he would be in danger of dying. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but grin when he understood that he had inadvertently become a tool. No wonder he suddenly felt the treasure light and smelled that fragrance from so far away. However, no matter what the situation was, since he had seen it, he naturally couldn't let it go. It was precisely because of this that Yi Shiwen felt compassion in his heart and decided to let him live. However, the Chaos Python obviously didn't appreciate it. It just stared coldly at Yi Shiwen. The deafening roars even caused the heavens and earth to shake violently. Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. If you want to die, then continue. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and began to become unhappy. You're courting death by snatching my yellow middle plum. I'm going to swallow you. Although the Chaos Python couldn't speak, it transmitted such a message through its will. Obviously, its spiritual wisdom wasn't fully developed yet. Otherwise, it would have understood the severity of the situation. You're very powerful. If I swallow you, I will be able to completely complete my transformation. This chaos will no longer be able to bind me. You're courting death. Yi Shiwen's eyes brightened. With his current status, who would dare to say in front of him that they would swallow him? Roar. The Chaos Python attacked again. With a loud roar, its huge body pounced towards Yi Shiwen at an unimaginable speed. Countless primal chaos rolled up in an instant, causing his figure to be faintly discernible within it. Bang! Yi Shiwen raised his hand and blocked the attack of the Chaos Python again. Roar! The Chaos Python instantly transformed into a middle-aged man with scales all over his body. He held a huge sword in his hand and slashed towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! The chaos was split apart. It was going to kill Yi Shiwen in one blow. Yi Shiwen could see through it at a glance. This sword should be the transformation of the Chaos Python's entire body. It was extremely terrifying. It was much more powerful than any divine weapon. If an emperor who had just attained Tao not long ago encountered this guy, he might not be in life-threatening danger. However, he would still suffer a little. If it was the NID who encountered this beast, he would definitely suffer a little. Unfortunately, the person he encountered was Yi Shiwen. What kind of person was Yi Shiwen? He sneered. Suddenly, bursts of golden light burst out of his hands. Then, he directly caught the sneak attack of the sword with his bare hand. A look of disbelief flashed in the figure's eyes. He didn't expect this outsider to be so powerful. He could even catch the sword that his body had transformed into. He had encountered some chaotic creatures in the past, but none of them were as powerful as Yi Shiwen. At this moment, he realized that this guy in front of him wasn't someone to be trifled with. In fact, he was extremely terrifying. However, his spiritual wisdom hadn't fully developed yet. Although he sensed the danger, he still continued to attack Yi Shiwen. Stubborn fool! Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. He exerted his strength and instantly pinched it. However, the Chaos Python let out a blood-curdling screech. The chaos python's mouth was crushed on the spot. One must know that this was an illusion formed from its body. One could imagine how terrifying it would be if it was crushed by Yi Shiwen. The chaos python screamed and wanted to escape. At this moment, it was already scared to death by Yi Shiwen. It didn't dare to stay any longer. However, how could Yi Shiwen give it a chance to escape? The Avicii sword appeared in his hand. With a slash, this powerful body that could survive in the chaos was split into pieces on the spot. The Avicii sword's sword aura was thousands of miles long. With one slash, the chaos python was split into two. Even though it had transformed into its real body, it was still split into two. His primordial spirit was completely destroyed in an instant. Killing this beast with one slash was not difficult at all. This slash startled the chaos. It also scared the chaotic creatures that were rushing over. Although the yellow middle plum was very attractive to them, this slash still scared them. This slash gave them a sense of extreme danger. At this moment, these chaotic creatures still knew what was good for them. Yi Shiwen smiled slightly. To a large extent, he didn't hold back and attacked with all his strength just now. He wanted to scare these chaotic creatures away to avoid unnecessary trouble. He simply started to refine this giant python in front of the yellow middle plum. Anyway, the yellow middle plum still needed some time to mature. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Yi Shiwen's turn. Instead, it would have been swallowed by this chaos python. With Yi Shiwen's skill, it was not difficult to refine this chaos python. It didn't take long for this python, which had once run amok in the Bell of Chaos, to be completely refined by Yi Shiwen into a treasured armor and a treasured sword. Although they were not as good as Dao tools, they were not far off in terms of power. The only thing they lacked was to integrate his own Dao into them. Yi Shiwen had named these two divine tools Chaotic Python Armor and Green Light Sword. Therefore, it was quite easy to use them since he had refined them himself. They weren't inferior to the Avicii sword. However, they were naturally inferior in terms of power. After Yi Shiwen refined the Chaos Python, the yellow middle plum had also matured. Although the yellow middle plum kept colliding with the space barrier in the process, it was useless in the end. In the end, Yi Shiwen forcibly grabbed the yellow middle plum, and thoroughly refined and subdued its spiritual wisdom. The whole process was much more complicated than subduing that enlightening mind ancient tree. However, the ferocity of the yellow middle plum couldn't be compared with that of that enlightening mind ancient tree. Yi Shiwen received the yellow middle plum into his inner world, and lived next to the enlightening mind ancient tree. The first thing Yi Shiwen did was to pluck a plum from the yellow middle plum, and swallow it into his stomach. The moment Yi Shiwen swallowed the yellow middle plum, it immediately turned into a pure surging martial power, and spread throughout his limbs and bones. Such pure energy! Yi Shiwen couldn't help but be very surprised. One must know that ordinary heavenly treasures were no longer of any use to him when his cultivation had reached this level. It was impossible for them to increase his cultivation. However, he felt that his cultivation, which had stagnated for many years, had taken a step forward by swallowing this yellow middle plum. This should be the fortuitous encounter and opportunity that the Demon King had mentioned. Yi Shiwen nodded with satisfaction. Sure enough, it was useless to cultivate in seclusion. Only such a fortuitous encounter could make his cultivation progress in a short time. Yi Shiwen didn't continue to practice after he had thoroughly refined this yellow middle plum. After all, the primal chaos wasn't a good place to practice. After all, he didn't know how many powerful creatures of the primal chaos were eyeing him covetously. Chapter 2974. After swallowing a yellow middle plum, Yi Shiwen did not stop, but continued to move forward into the chaos. He found some good things one after another. Some were even relatively rare divine materials, which had only appeared once or twice since ancient times. However, Compared to the previous harvest of yellow middle plum and colorful living soil, it was nothing. However, this was normal in the primal chaos. All kinds of divine materials were scattered in the primal chaos. So, it was impossible for them to gather together. Yi Shiwen had been able to find divine materials so frequently because there hadn't been an Emperor Realm expert in the 10,000 worlds in recent years. Otherwise, they would have already been found by the predecessors. These divine materials that Yi Shiwen found were mostly divine materials that had been bred in the heavens over these years. And those who became Emperor Realm after Yi Shiwen were going to cry. After Yi Shiwen entered the chaos twice, it was really hard to say how many were left. As the saying goes, first come, first serve. Those who are fast will get it, and those who are fast won't get it. This was the logic. Just like that, he'd obtained over 100 divine materials, and he'd practically collected all the divine materials that had been nurtured in the primal chaos after the Qin Emperor. Of course, it was not that there were no divine materials further away, but if he wanted to find them, he had to go deeper into the chaos. However, the further away from the heavens, the more unstable the chaos was. In other words, the more dangerous it was. Even super creatures like the chaos python would appear more and more. It could be said that the further away from the heavens, the more dangerous it would be. Even the Emperor Realm would be in danger. At that time, if he wanted to get a divine tool, the price he had to pay would increase exponentially. And just as Yi Shiwen was searching for many divine materials in the chaos, hundreds of years had passed in the blink of an eye. Originally, hundreds of years, in any case, was not a long time. However, for the heavens, earth-shaking changes had taken place, because the long and despairing period of the heavenly law, which had lasted from the Second War against the heavens to the present, had finally passed. The moment the period of the heavenly law disappeared, all the peak quasi-emperors who had really touched that level felt the disappearance of the heavenly law, because they felt that the barrier that seemed to be impossible to break had suddenly become a lot weaker. Of course, it didn't mean that they would be able to charge, and even if it was much weaker, but at least it wouldn't be as solid as before. The more one stayed in this realm, the more one could feel how difficult it was to make a breakthrough. And the fact that Yi Shiwen was able to make a breakthrough under such circumstances made him even more terrifying. Since ancient times, aside from the great Qin Emperor, only the current martial emperors had managed to become martial emperors while imprisoned. But now that the confinement period was over, the risk of them becoming emperors was much smaller. There wouldn't be a terrifying scene like Yi Shiwen becoming an emperor again. In fact, the comparison was very obvious. Everyone also felt that D&I had become an emperor, but compared to Yi Shiwen's emperor ascension, it paled in comparison. Sure enough, there were strong and weak emperors. For a moment, the entire universe seemed to have sunk into complete silence, entering a state of slumber. This was because everyone had entered a state of frenzied cultivation. All the experts who had reached the peak of the quasi-emperor realm were attempting to break through to the sovereign emperor realm. And those who hadn't reached it were also madly cultivating, hoping to catch up. Everyone was very clear that what was coming next was a real great era, a great era where emperors emerged in large numbers. If there was no way to become an emperor, there would be no right to speak at all. Whether it was for oneself, for the inheritance, for the race, for everything else, they had to find a way to break through. This was the best opportunity since ancient times. If they missed this opportunity, there might not be another chance. Because according to various rumors, the number of emperors in the world was limited. Once the number reached a certain number, the world would restrain the sovereign emperor realm. At that time, it would be almost impossible to break through unless one had the strength of the great Qin Emperor or the martial emperor. Didn't you see that there were only two such monsters in the past tens of thousands of years? In other words, the following period of time would truly determine the outcome of the battle. Many of the old antiques had existed since the Second War of Resistance against the heavens. For this moment, they had already given their all. Under such circumstances, the originally stable situation in the past few years became even more stable. Even the burden of the divine court, which had always been in charge of arbitration, had become much lighter. In recent years, they had also devoted more energy to cultivation. Although not everyone in the divine court was qualified to aspire to the throne, there were still quite a few who had truly reached the peak of the quasi-emperor realm and were qualified to break through to that supreme realm. This strange situation continued for another 1,000 years. Finally, something changed. Someone began to undergo a tribulation. This person's tribulation immediately attracted everyone's attention. Although the pressure of the heavenly Tao produced during the tribulation could not be hidden from others, this person was undergoing the tribulation in a secret realm. Therefore, others could only vaguely guess from the strength of the tribulation. They could not really see who exactly was undergoing the tribulation. Everyone was watching. Finally, someone was willing to take the lead. Not only did he help everyone to ascertain the strength of the heavenly tribulation after the end of the confinement period, but he was also testing the intentions of that person in the divine court. Although the confinement period was now over, everyone understood that the confinement period was only the first big trouble in order to become an emperor. The second big trouble was martial Emperor Yi Shiwen himself. What if Yi Shiwen did not want others to become emperor? Then, there was no doubt that anyone who tried to become an emperor under his nose might be met with a blow from him. Although this possibility was not great, after all, judging from Yi Shiwen's willingness to preach to everyone, he did not seem to oppose them becoming emperor. He was certainly not that narrow-minded. However, this kind of thing was hard to say. No one was willing to take such a risk. It was not until the news that Yi Shiwen had left the divine court and entered the primal chaos spread that everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Without such a huge shadow pressing down on their heads, they dared to try something that they had not dared to try before. Under the attention of everyone, this person finally succeeded in crossing the heavenly tribulation. Although it seemed that he had almost failed based on the situation of the heavenly tribulation, he succeeded in the end. Success, success. The second emperor has finally appeared. Oh my God, the long confinement period is finally over. I thought I could not wait any longer. Finally, someone dares to eat crabs. It seems that the martial emperor is not so narrow-minded. Come to think of it, what kind of person is he? It is not an exaggeration to say that he is an emperor throughout the ages. How could he do something that would ruin the future of others? Is the era of heroes vying for supremacy finally coming? Many people burst into tears. Even if they had an iron heart, they still could not help but burst into tears when they saw the long-awaited day. Needless to say, the benefits of the era of the emperors would naturally be restored to an unprecedented state of prosperity. The benefits that one emperor could bring were simply innumerable. Not to mention the reigning of multiple emperors. From ancient times to the present, it was clear from many cases that the era when there were many sovereigns and emperors was the strongest and most prosperous era in the myriad of worlds. However, just when everyone thought that the era of the emperors was about to enter the era of the emperors, a change finally occurred. The person who succeeded in crossing the heavenly tribulation finally revealed his true identity. He was actually the survivor of the netherworld kingdom that had been annihilated previously. He was the only super genius who had escaped. The person who crossed the heavenly tribulation was actually the underworld lord. Soon, more news came. It turned out that the underworld lord had already escaped before the netherworld kingdom was attacked. This was to preserve the seed of hope. In the end, no one expected him to succeed. The underworld lord had become an emperor. Underworld emperor had always been very clear that when Yi Shiwen invaded the netherworld kingdom, he would be the first target to be killed. Everyone could escape, but he could not. Only when he was dead, Yi Shiwen would not continue to pursue the escaped underworld lord. Otherwise, the underworld lord would not be able to escape from Yi Shiwen's pursuit. Now it seemed that underworld emperor's plan should be considered successful. No one knew what resources underworld emperor had left behind before sending him away. It actually allowed the underworld lord to be the first to become an emperor after the confinement period. Obviously, it was not bad. After the underworld lord became an emperor, he quickly set off shocking wave. Relying on the unique cultivation techniques of the Netherworld Kingdom, he gathered an undead army. Moreover, as time passed, more and more places were breached by Underworld Emperor. The undead army under the Underworld Lord was like a rolling snowball, getting bigger and bigger. Soon, it formed a huge army that swept towards the heavens and the myriad realms. It was different from the elite armies of the Netherworld Kingdom back then. Clearly, this army looked more like a motley crew. Under the leadership of the survivors of the Netherworld Kingdom who had escaped back then, it looked majestic. However, in order to avoid the attention of the heavens and the myriad realms, the Netherworld Kingdom took the route of elite soldiers. Although their military strength was not as strong as it was now, almost all of them were top-notch experts. Just the number of quasi-emperor level experts alone was unknown. The more experts that were buried, the stronger their strength would be. It was completely different from the current situation where they were forcefully revived and could not display much of their strength when they were alive. In this aspect, the Underworld Lord did not seem to care. It was more like he was taking revenge. He drove this huge undead army all the way in the direction of the Divine Court. Everyone understood that the Underworld Lord wanted to take revenge on the great enmity that Yi Shiwen had led an army to destroy the Netherworld Kingdom back then. He also wanted to destroy the Divine Court. However, it was not possible without a sufficient army. Therefore, he conveniently destroyed other forces, killed them, and turned them into an undead army. Those forces that were destroyed and massacred could be said to have taken the blame for the Divine Court. However, the unscrupulous actions of the Underworld Lord still aroused the anger of the myriad realms. Chapter 2975. There was a very important reason why the various clans followed Yi Shiwen to destroy the Netherworld Kingdom previously. It was because they were afraid that the Netherworld Kingdom would sweep the world and turn the heavens and realms into a kingdom of death. Now, their original worries had become reality. Sure enough, if the people of the Netherworld Kingdom were to gain power, it would be a huge disaster for the heavens and realms. But this time, the Underworld Lord was determined to take revenge. He swept all the way and rushed in the direction of the Divine Court. The major forces of various clans were not his opponents at all. The mighty undead army was too huge. Once they died in battle, they would be revived with a special secret technique. Even if they could not recover 100% of their combat power, just a little bit of combat power was enough to be terrifying. In addition, there was the Underworld Lord in the middle army. The experts of the allied forces of various clans did not have an advantage at all. Under the rapid march of the Underworld Lord, it could be said that they were defeated all the way. They were constantly retreating in the direction of the Divine Court. In the face of such a situation, it was impossible for the Divine Court to remain indifferent as the leader of the Emperor's inheritance in the heavens and realms. Moreover, this undead army was coming for the Divine Court. Naturally, it was impossible for them to stay out of it. However, even if the Divine Court dispatched the army, there was still no way to stop the advancement of the undead army. This was because the Underworld Lord would intervene from time to time. Once the Underworld Lord intervened, the army would be useless no matter how strong it was. The premise that the Emperor's inheritance could resist the expedition of an emperor was that it was inside the inheritance. Once the inheritance was out, the Emperor was still the most tyrannical. In just 10 years, this undead army had already swept the world and reached the door of the Divine Court. For a time, the entire heavens and realms were in a state of panic. In particular, The martial Emperor Yi Shiwen, whom everyone had high hopes for, did not appear. Even when he was being attacked, he still did not appear. This made many people have bad thoughts. If Yi Shiwen was only in close cultivation, perhaps no one would be so rebellious. However, Yi Shiwen had entered the chaos. All the major inheritances had records about the chaos. Except for the emperor, no one dared to really go deep into the chaos. However, even the emperor was in danger. Since ancient times, there were many emperors who had entered the chaos and returned with serious injuries. This proved that there were indeed terrifying creatures in the primal chaos that could threaten emperors. Under such circumstances, Yi Shiwen hadn't returned for a long time. This made many people's imagination run wild. Especially in the past few years, under the arrangement of the Dark Lord, all kinds of rumors that Yi Shiwen had fallen in the primal chaos were simply endless. Even many people of the Divine Palace believed it. Even if they believed in Yi Shiwen, the dangers in the primal chaos were well known to everyone in the universe. Therefore, under such circumstances, it was hard to say whether Yi Shiwen had suffered serious injuries or not. In any case, it was a fact that Yi Shiwen wasn't here at this time. Under such a grim situation, Yi Shiwen couldn't be counted on for the time being. Many people had set their sights on those who were qualified to become emperors. If they became emperors, they would be able to stop the Dark Lord. Corpse calamity. This was the true corpse calamity. It was a calamity of corpses that engulfed almost half of the universe, and the one who caused this calamity was an imperial emperor-level figure. Since ancient times, it had always been like this. As long as it could cause a disaster that shook the universe, it would be like this. Even if ordinary peak emperor-level figures wanted to cause trouble, they would have been killed in minutes. Soon, this army had really killed their way to the mountain gate of the Divine Palace. However, the current Divine Palace was already different from tens of thousands of years ago. It could be said that there were many experts and deep foundations. Even if they were killed in front of the mountain gate, they didn't seem to be dispirited. In particular, the various trump cards that Yi Shiwen had left behind finally emerged at this time. As the inheritance of an emperor-level figure, the foundation of the Divine Palace was indeed much deeper than others. Rumble! Outside the Divine Palace, it had completely turned into a battlefield. The original Jade Stairs had long been destroyed in the flames of war. Countless experts were fighting here, and the army of the undead didn't know fatigue. They just rushed forward and killed. This was the most terrifying thing, because for them, they didn't know what death was, and they didn't have any spiritual wisdom at all. The Dark Lord had paid a huge price to forcibly revive these corpses. These corpses also didn't have the spiritual wisdom of the original experts of the Dark Kingdom. They almost only acted according to their instincts. In the Divine Palace, countless formations were activated one after another. There were also a few Emperor-level formations that Yi Shiwen had left behind. Terrifying attacks swept out, and every time they swept out, a large number of the undead army would be wiped out. Even in the distance, there were war fortresses showing their might. Energy waves swept across the sky, fell into the army of the undead, and completely annihilated them. Huge war beasts that were as huge as stars rushed back and forth, trampling the sky. Countless undead army were completely swept into ashes by the shock waves formed by the trampling before they could even get close. However, the army of the undead was too large, filling the entire universe. No matter how the Divine Palace fought, and even used forbidden methods, the line of defense was still in danger. The Dark Lord didn't come straight to the Divine Palace because he wanted to collect these cannon fodder. Now, these cannon fodder were continuously consuming the foundation of the Divine Palace, and sooner or later, the Divine Palace would collapse. No matter how many cannon fodder were destroyed, the Dark Lord wouldn't even blink. Today, the Emperor will trample the Divine Palace. Don't even think about escaping. Even Yi Shiwen can't save you. The Nether Lord's cruel and cold voice reverberated. It was like a heavy blow to the hearts of the people of the divine palace, almost crushing their minds. Bulsh *T. A loud shout came from the divine palace. When the martial emperor returns, it will be the death of a clown like you. Even your master died in the hands of the martial emperor. What qualifications do you have to say these words? Yemo suddenly flew out, and the Tianyuan mirror in his hand burst out bursts of blood-red light, directly sweeping out like a laser, cutting half of the sky. The undead army that was swept by the light directly turned into atoms, and disappeared without a trace. The power of the Tianyuan mirror as a Dao tool finally broke out completely. At this time, the Tianyuan mirror was no longer in a damaged state, and had already been repaired by Yi Shiwen over the years with the divine materials of the heavens. It was even more powerful than an ordinary Dao tool. At this time, the ferocious power of the Tianyuan mirror finally fully manifested, simply burying the heavens together with it. It was very terrifying. Humph, it's just a stubborn resistance like a cornered beast fighting. The Dark Lord didn't have the slightest fear towards Yemo. If he was still at the peak of the quasi-emperor realm, perhaps he would have to be careful when he encountered Yemo, but now he had become an emperor. There was naturally no need to mention the huge gap between the emperor and the quasi-emperor. Rumble! In another direction, Yi Qianqian attacked, and the huge devil ship swept across the sky, rampaging through the undead army. No one could stop it, and it was almost completely crushed. And on the bow of the huge devil ship, Yi Qianqian was wearing the underworld saint clothes, and constantly attacked. Masses of death power swept out, and cut the heavens and the earth into countless black and white squares, and the undead within the squares died tragically one after another. In addition to Yi Qianqian and Yemo, the other peak quasi-emperors of the divine court also attacked one after another. These old antiques were battle-hardened, and although they didn't have a Dao tool to protect themselves, they were still quite strong in terms of strength. They rushed and killed in the undead army, and swept in all directions. Originally, there weren't any powerful existences among these undead. At most, there were some remnants of the Netherworld kingdom mixed in with them, but they didn't amount to much. The most terrifying thing was the endless number of undead. In addition to this endless number, there was also the Dark Lord, an expert of the Emperor-King level, holding the fort. This was just like when Yi Shiwen had led the army of the myriad heavens to destroy the Netherworld kingdom back then, and there was almost no end to them. But even with these experts, the various defensive lines of the divine court were still in danger, and there was a possibility that they would collapse. Dong! An incomparably loud sound of a bell rang out. Along with this sound, ripples swept across the sky and rushed into the army of undead. It was unknown how many tens of thousands of undead were instantly swept to ashes by this attack. Then, another yin-yang diagram of life and death flew out, and the diagram of the two extremes of yin and yang flew into the undead army, and began a frenzied massacre. The undead army was crushed by the yin-yang diagram of life and death, and turned into ashes. Heavenly Court, the Heavenly Court's army has come to support. How could the people of the divine court not understand what was happening? Naturally, the Heavenly Court had made a move. Because of the relationship between Yi Shiwen, Yi Wudi, and Young Kuan-peng, the relationship between the divine court and the Heavenly Court was also very good. At this time, when the divine court was in danger, the first to take action was naturally the Heavenly Court's army. Sure enough, almost after a few breaths, a mighty army appeared in the distance, led by an extremely luxurious 9 dragons chariot. 2 figures stood side by side, but who else could it be but Yi Wudi and Young Kuan-peng? Lord of the Heavenly Court, Yi Wudi, and Demon Master Kuan-peng, have come to support? After a loud shout, Yi Wudi and Young Kuan-peng flew out immediately, controlling the Demon Emperor's bell and the yin-yang diagram of life and death, and slaughtered into the undead army. With the addition of this new force from the Heavenly Court, everyone from the Divine Court felt a jolt in their hearts. As expected, the heavenly court was still the most reliable at this moment. Everyone was even more confident that they could stop the Dark Lord now. Walla lala! At the same time, from the south, a sea of fire spread over, burning countless undead into ashes in an instant. A beautiful figure followed the sea of fire and slaughtered into the undead army. Chapter 2976. This figure swept away everything in its path. It was none other than Hua Menghan. Hua Menghan was wearing a phoenix robe. He was standing above a sea of fire. The law of fire was revolving around his body. He was jumping up and down in excitement. He looked like a fire spirit. Wherever Hua Menghan passed, no undead could resist. Even if there were some remnants of the Nether Kingdom who tried to stop him, they were burned to ashes in an instant. In the absence of an emperor, a Dao weapon was almost equivalent to a nuclear weapon. Even a quasi-emperor would not be able to stop it, let alone others. Behind Hua Menghan there was also a mighty army. It was as if the world was burning red. This was the army of the ancient Phoenix realm, led by Hua Menghan, who had come to support the divine court. Ha ha ha, it's the ancient Phoenix realm. Even the ancient Phoenix realm has come. This time, we will be able to stop this army of the undead. Many experts of the divine court were completely relieved at this time. With the reinforcements of 2 emperors' inheritances, no matter how tyrannical the army of the Nether Kingdom was, they would not be able to win. Dark Lord, you have crossed the line. You want to use death to replace living beings. You are crazy. There was another cold voice. A huge palace descended from the sky. Countless divine birds followed the palace and rushed down, smashing the undead into pieces. A fiery red figure appeared in the sky. It was none other than a mortal fire dragon. At this time, the martial arts great sect army finally came to support, and the Phoenix Palace took the lead, killing countless undead. The martial arts great sect army also swept over under the guidance of the Phoenix Palace. Boom! A shocking sword chi tore through the sky, cutting through half of the world, and blasted into the army of the undead. Wherever the sword chi passed, the army of the undead was completely vaporized. A long sword flew across the sky. Its golden color carried an unparalleled might as it swept out. This is the Taya sword. It really is the Taya sword. This means that the Emperor clan, Ji clan, has also come. Some people of the divine court recognized the sword at a glance. After the Taya sword, the army of the imperial clan, the Ji family, followed. In terms of the most powerful lineage in the world, with the deepest foundation, it was probably the imperial clan, the Ji family. Furthermore, they had so many imperial emperors laying down their foundations. Soon, the reinforcements from all sides arrived. After the Emperor clan, the 8 royal clans of the Demon clan also came with their elite. The Dragon Island and other ancient emperors' inheritances finally came. They gathered in the divine court, intending to completely ambush the army of the undead in the divine court. Although the Dark Lord intended to take revenge on the divine court, if they were not stopped, the army of the undead would sweep the entire world. If that happened, the entire world would become the land of the Nether Kingdom, and they would be slaughtered by the undead. The divine court could. Moreover, if they did not do their best to support the divine court now, how would they explain the situation when Yi Shiwen returned in the future? For a moment, the entire battlefield was filled with Dao artifacts. Many of them had never seen so many Imperial Lord-level Dao artifacts being used together in their entire lives. Any one of the Dao artifacts possessed the power to obliterate the world. Now that so many of them were used together, the might they could unleash was simply unimaginable. The vast army of departed spirits was quickly reduced to a visible number. All forces finally heaved a sigh of relief. Under the situation where everyone joined forces, even the army of the undead, which was said to be endless, could not hold on. After all, they were all cannon fodder. If the elites of the Nether Kingdom had such a scale, all forces would not be able to hold on. Cannon fodder was just cannon fodder. However, everyone was most concerned about the situation of the Dark Lord. At this time, only the Emperor clan, the Dark Lord, could truly turn the situation around. Sure enough, under such circumstances, the Dark Lord could not just watch the army of the undead be defeated. He directly took action. Countless power of death condensed into a giant hand of death, and slammed down on the divine court. Rumble! The huge and terrifying power caused the entire divine court to tremble violently. Countless arrays were completely reduced to ashes by this attack. A huge hole instantly appeared in the defenses of the divine court. Oh no, he wants to break into the divine court directly! At this time, Yemo immediately roared. He immediately understood what Hades' Emperor was trying to do. While everyone was pacing back and forth on the battlefield, he wanted to break into the divine court in one fell swoop and kill all the disciples in the divine court. If he really succeeded, then even if the divine court could survive this battle, they would probably suffer heavy losses. Damn it, how despicable! Yi Qianqian wanted to return to help, but it was too late. The giant hand slammed into the divine court's defenses, constantly clawing at the arrays. Many of the divine court disciples hiding in the arrays could not dodge in time and were crushed into a bloody mist on the spot. On the sacred mountain in the deepest part of the divine court, Dawn hugged Little Crescent Moon with a solemn expression. She did not expect the situation to be so serious. The divine court was actually being attacked. Ever since her husband became emperor, she had never encountered such a situation. Little Crescent Moon also seemed to feel that a storm was coming, and she began to cry loudly. She couldn't stop it at all. Suddenly, a terrifying aura descended upon the sacred mountain. A giant hand tore through the sky and tore everything apart, grabbing at Little Crescent Moon. It should be said that the Underworld Lord's target was Little Crescent Moon. As Yi Shiwen's only child, Little Crescent Moon's status in the divine court could be said to be like a little princess. In terms of importance, it was not an exaggeration. Now, the Underworld Lord wanted to take Little Crescent Moon away. Wah! Little Crescent Moon immediately cried when she sensed the danger. However, the giant hand did not have any intention of stopping. On the contrary, it continued to grab at her. Dawn had no choice but to protect Little Crescent Moon under her body, clenching her teeth and persevering. And just as the giant hand was about to grab Little Crescent Moon, an astonishing beam of light suddenly flew out from Little Crescent Moon's body. The beam of light transformed into a figure. Who else could it be but Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen held the Nether Dragon halberd in hand and slashed at the giant hand. Rumble! The collision between the two Empyrean lords happened in an instant. Yi Shiwen's strike blasted apart the giant hand formed from Qi. His strike followed the Qi hand and headed straight for the Underworld Lord. Bam! The attack that erupted from the Nether Dragon halberd was eventually blocked by the Underworld Lord's hand. Oh! The Underworld Supremacy had not expected that his sneak attack would fail. With his cultivation and status, it was already embarrassing enough for him to sneak an attack on a child. What was even more embarrassing was that he had actually failed. This was because he never expected that Yi Shiwen would be so extravagant as to leave a Dao artifact in a child's body. This was the root cause of his failure. Yi Shiwen disintegrated on the spot after his attack failed. It was not the real Yi Shiwen, but a manifestation of a wisp of spirit. At the critical moment, he had activated the Nether Dragon halberd, allowing him to destroy the Underworld Lord's attack. However, with the power of that wisp of spirit, it was already the limit. It was impossible to go further. After all, the Underworld Lord was an Empyrean Lord. It was naturally not easy to destroy an Empyrean Lord's attack. Ha ha ha! The trump card that Yi Shiwen set up in the little girl's body has finally come into effect. Yemo immediately heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the situation. He could not help but laugh out loud. When Yi Shiwen left the nether dragon halberd in Little Crescent Moon's body, everyone felt that it was a bit wasteful. After all, it was a Tao artifact. He actually left it to a little girl. Even if she was his own daughter, it was still a bit extravagant. However, Yi Shiwen was very rich in the aspect of Tao artifacts. Throughout the ages, there were probably not many Empyrean lords who could be compared with him in this aspect. He had more than one Tao artifact before he became an Empyrean lord. Therefore, Yi Shiwen's concept was different from ordinary people. He did not think that this thing was so precious. However, it was just to add an additional safeguard for Little Crescent Moon. He did not expect that it would be used so soon. He did not expect that an Empyrean lord, a master of the Empyrean lord's level, would actually attack Little Crescent Moon. This was why the spirit in the nether dragon halberd was exhausted and dispersed. Everyone could not help but sigh in relief when they saw that the attack of the Empyrean lord was finally defeated and did not cause huge casualties. Everyone could not help but let out a sigh of relief. Suddenly, everyone shrank the line of defense. They could not let the Empyrean lord have such an opportunity again. It was enough for such a situation to happen once. If they let it happen again, they would not be able to face anyone. Empyrean lord, do you have any shame? As a dignified Empyrean lord, you actually attacked a little girl who has not yet reached adulthood. Where is your moral integrity? Has it been eaten by a dog? Yemo shouted. Humph, in the divine palace today, all of you will die. Do you think you can still survive? Said the Empyrean lord with a sneer. It just so happens that all of you are potential competitors. Today I will kill all of you. At that time, no one will compete with me anymore. The words of the Empyrean lord suddenly made many people shiver. As expected, he is another narrow-minded person. We should not let him become an Empyrean lord at all. His ascension to Empyrean lord is a huge threat to the myriad world. Unlike Yi Shiwen's tolerance, the Empyrean lord's performance was too dangerous. And these words also made these Empyrean lords' mood very bad. The Empyrean lord was only one step ahead of them. Now, he actually completely regarded them as ants. Does he think he can kill them as he wishes? This was simply too arrogant. Chapter 2977. The terrifying sounds of collision instantly turned into monstrous tides. The repercussions of the battle caused even the world to tremble. Countless living beings sensed this attack and even felt a tremor that came from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if the entire world was about to collapse. Rumble! Back then, Yi Shiwen was also a powerful martial emperor who killed the rebellious emperor and finally quelled the chaos of the heavenly clan. Moreover, even if he is lucky enough not to die, do you think he can come back to save you? Even if he can come back, I will kill him with my own hands. Everyone took a closer look and saw that this person was none other than Yi Shiwen. For a time, all the Tao tools began to completely awaken. Terrifying power swept out, and billions of rays of light erupted, pouring down overwhelmingly. All kinds of terrifying rays of light erupted in this process. The horror of the Underworld Lord was far beyond everyone's imagination. No one expected that the Underworld Lord would be so powerful. He was not like a new Emperor Lord who had just become an emperor. Many people secretly thought that using the opportunity to become an emperor was indeed not the right way. Not only was he not as good as Yi Shiwen, who tore apart the Great Path to become an emperor during the confinement period, he was not even as good as the Underworld Lord who became an emperor normally. On the body of the Underworld Lord, golden rays of light soared into the sky, illuminating hundreds of millions of miles. It was so bright that it seemed to be cast from the heavens. It rushed to the sun and the moon, so that heaven and earth could feel his majesty and power. Boom! He directly rushed into the 5 yuan sky, punishing Great Array without any fear. His simple attack was incomparably domineering. So powerful! Even Yi Wudi had to admit that the Underworld Lord was really unimaginably powerful at this time. For a time, the entire universe was filled with a large amount of Tao power, as if many Emperor Lords had awakened at the same time, madly resisting in the entire universe. This attack made all the experts' hearts palpitate. With Yi Shiwen's loud shout, the word seal expanded in the wind, like a pair of wings, wrapping the Underworld Lord in it. At this juncture, no one dared to hide their strength, because once they hid their strength, it was likely that the final result would be a tragic death. Anyone who could cultivate to become an emperor was a powerful existence with absolute arrogance. But now, everything had been reversed. The Underworld Lord's strength was terrifyingly tyrannical, completely different from the strength of a newborn sovereign emperor that everyone had imagined. He was even stronger. The seal character emitted billions of beams of divine light that slammed into the Underworld's supremacy. Countless Imperial Lord-level laws were attracted over and fused with it, causing the seal character to grow larger and stronger. It pushed the Underworld's supremacy back tens of thousands of miles. Bang! A treasured armor appeared on the Underworld's supremacy's body, directly blocking the young Kuanping's attack. He turned around and blasted out. Even the yin-yang diagram of life and death was shaken. It suffered the impact and was sent flying. I think you are really too arrogant. Since ancient times, there have been people who were slaughtered right after becoming martial emperors. You are too arrogant. The Underworld sovereigns might even caused many Tao artifacts to start humming, erupting with waves of Tao might to contend with the Underworld sovereign. Seal, please. Seeing that the young Kuanping was about to suffer, Yi Mo immediately knew that he could not wait any longer. He quickly shouted. In the depths of the divine court, a ray of light broke through the vast sky, emitting billions of powerful rays of light, covering the sky and covering the earth. It directly formed an incomparably huge seal character. The divine light was monstrous, surging, and directly suppressed in the direction of the Underworld's supremacy. Everyone had never imagined that the Underworld's supremacy's attack would be so terrifying. Many Tao artifacts spontaneously united to resist him. It was difficult to contend with an emperor like the Underworld's supremacy with just the awakening of one Tao artifact. However, it was completely different when many Tao artifacts united. It was as if someone was shouting this character in the universe. Countless energy faintly formed a human figure. The Underworld's supremacy sneered. His words revealed unimaginable strength. Obviously, he did not take Yi Shiwen seriously. Boom! Humph, you are all a group of ignorant people. Do you really think that an emperor is so easy to deal with? You are just a group of frogs at the bottom of a well. The Underworld's supremacy sneered. Obviously, he did not agree with the words of these people. Everyone was shocked by the strength of the Underworld's supremacy. He was even more tyrannical than the NID. At that time, the NID besieged GMO and the others and formed the 5 Yuan Punishing Heaven formation, but it was unable to defeat them. Bang! Humph! The Underworld's supremacy attacked again. With a blow, the defense line formed by the joint forces of various Tao artifacts actually retreated several steps before barely stopping. His vital energy and blood even emitted a rumbling sound, as if the stars were shining. Seal. Underworld supremacy, do you really think that you are invincible in the world? Impossible! How can the Underworld's supremacy be so strong? The second unlucky one was the young Kuanping. He directly transformed into his original body. Above his head was the yin-yang life and death diagram. He collided with the Underworld's supremacy with unimaginable strength. The major forces had no way to contend against him unless someone became an emperor. However, that was really too difficult to say. Small trick. Descendant of the demon master, die and become my slave. Ha 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 ha. The Underworld supremacy laughed loudly and directly grabbed at the young Kuanping. He had followed 2 emperors. In terms of insight, there were probably not many in the universe who could compare with him. Naturally, he was very clear about what a normal emperor who had just become an emperor looked like. At this time, everyone missed the days when there was a martial emperor suppressing everywhere. Although it seemed uncomfortable to have someone above their head, it was still better than being exterminated like this. You actually dared to come out instead of hiding. Even if there is no martial emperor, we can still kill you. The only difference is that we will have to pay a more painful price. What wishful thinking! Yemo, who was in the middle of the formation, sneered. The underworld supremacy's unscrupulous attitude completely enraged many people. Boom! The strength of an emperor was indeed extraordinary, but it should not be to this extent, especially when he had just become an emperor. He had not even condensed his own Tao artifact. Logically speaking, it was absolutely impossible for him to be so strong. However, the underworld supremacy had done it. There must be a reason that no one knew about. Who is the one having wishful thinking? The underworld supremacy took a step forward, and the aura on his body exploded. Countless rune laws condensed around his body, revealing a dense aura of death. It was incomparably surging. The entire universe was trembling, as if it could not withstand the recovery of so many powerful Tao powers. Even his strength was almost comparable to Yi Shiwen, who had just become an emperor. However, now that the martial emperor had gone deep into the chaos, no one knew when he would return. Only God knew if he could make it in time. The martial sect had already burned incense and prayed. If the martial emperor received the news, he would return. Therefore, the only thing they could do now was to completely block the underworld supremacy and buy time for the martial emperor to return. Stop him. We must not let him continue. I don't believe that his strength is comparable to a martial emperor. There must be something fishy about this. Yemo roared. Once again, he formed the 5 yuan punishing heaven formation with Yi Wudi and the others. They had already rehearsed this once, so they were naturally familiar with it. Bang! Yi Wudi, who bore the brunt of the attack, was directly hit. His entire body was instantly blasted away, and he spat out a mouthful of golden blood. Fortunately, he had the demon Emperor Bell to protect his body. Otherwise, his entire body would have been smashed into pieces. The figure of the huge Kuanping was revealed. As for the others, they restrained it from the side, using the 5 yuan punishing heaven formation as the core to resist. Ants! The underworld supremacy sneered and instantly attacked. For a moment, all kinds of terrifying aura poured out like mercury. For a moment, the sky fell and the earth cracked. The whole world seemed to shake with this attack. Even though the young Kuanping was already a peak quasi-emperor, at this time, he still felt that kind of terrifying pressure. All the laws around him were imprisoned by the underworld supremacy, and all his escape routes were blocked. This is absolutely impossible. He did not become an emperor during the confinement period. He definitely can't be so tyrannical. Is this the strength of the emperor level? Damn it, I also want to achieve the way. I also want to become an emperor. Only then can I compete with them. However, the pressure on him was also increasing. The underworld supremacy had no intention of playing hide and seek with them. All his attacks were strong and direct, and they were beaten back step by step. Soon, they had retreated to the edge of the divine court. At this time, everyone could only cooperate sincerely. They could all see that if the underworld supremacy continued to wreak havoc, he would gather more and more undead army. At that time, it was possible that he would really sweep the world. These people were once on the same level as the underworld supremacy. In fact, they had achieved the way much longer than the underworld supremacy. Some of them had achieved the way before the Second War of Resistance against the Heavens. Which one of them was not far more qualified than the underworld supremacy? Although seniority could not be eaten, the current situation was also different from the past. The Heavenly Way had released the confinement, and they could also become emperors in the future. In terms of mentality, they did not think that they were worse than the underworld's supremacy. Now, Yemo and the others had formed the 5 yuan Heaven Punishment Great Formation. Their skills were even stronger than before, and they had the help of stronger Tao tools. Even so, they were still beaten back step by step. From this aspect, it could be seen that the underworld supremacy was much more tyrannical than the NID of the past. It is really the era of the Emperor now. It is not the past. In the future era, there is no right to speak at all. Do you still expect Yi Shiwen to come back? What a joke, said the underworld supremacy coldly. Yi Shiwen went deep into the chaos, and there is no news of him for so long. It is obvious that he has fallen in it. However, the underworld supremacy's offensive had just begun. He attacked again and actually made the formation of the Tao tools retreat continuously. Chapter 2978. This seal word grew bigger and bigger in the universe. With the appearance of this seal word, everyone found that everything in the world seemed to be sealed. Time, space, yin and yang, the 5 elements, everything was completely sealed. He even felt as if a large hand was gripping his neck so tightly that he couldn't even breathe. It was too strong. It wasn't that no one had studied the Tao of sealing before, but no one knew that just the word seal could actually be so tyrannical. At this moment, they suddenly understood that perhaps the 3,000 great Taos in this world all had their own tyrannical aspects, and there was no great Tao that was useless. It all depended on one's own cultivation. The word seal, when used by Yi Shiwen, could actually burst out such a terrifying power. It could even seal an emperor lord. Is this the backup left by the martial emperor? It's really powerful. Someone couldn't help but exclaim. Obviously, this should be the backup left by the martial emperor Yi Shiwen. In these years, Yi Shiwen should have left a lot of backup for the divine court. No wonder he dared to leave the divine court and go deep into the chaos. Everyone held their breath and focused their attention. All eyes were staring at the direction of the underworld lord. They saw the underworld lord constantly struggling in this seal word. The word seal grew bigger and bigger in the wind. It almost covered the entire sky completely. Boom! 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 Facing the crushing seal word, the underworld lord's response was also very violent. He didn't think of retreating at all. Instead, he resisted in the most violent way, constantly bombarding this seal word. His terrifying fist smashed the sky, and even the entire seal word began to crack. Sure enough, the seal word still can't do anything to the underworld lord. Although the means left by the emperor lord can be used to fight against the emperor lord, after all, without the emperor lord personally activating it, it can at most restrain the emperor lord a little. Sigh, it's a pity. This underworld lord is too strong. It's really strange. He's already so terrifying when he just became an emperor lord. Is he going to challenge the martial emperor lord in the future? Many people couldn't help but have such thought. Yi Shiwen had established immortal majesty over the years. However, the Dark Lord's performance in the past few years had been too strong. In fact, everyone couldn't help but look at him in a new light. People couldn't help but have such thoughts. No one knows. Probably only they themselves know the difference in strength between the imperial emperors. Boom! A series of shocking explosions came from the seal character, and the Dark Lord's continuous shouts could be heard. Boom! A huge roar was heard, and the world shook violently. Then, everyone saw that the powerful seal that could seal the entire universe exploded on the spot. It could not withstand the series of fatal attacks from the Dark Lord. Even if Yi Shiwen were here, I would still kill him without hesitation. Moreover, you want to deal with me with a mere seal? How childish and laughable! Nether Sovereign laughed coldly. Clearly, he felt that everyone was extremely laughable. Kill! Suddenly, a sword of light appeared in Yemo's hand. A torrential evil aura surged from the ancient sword, causing the world to tremble violently. This is... Everyone was stunned as they looked at Yemo. On the sword of light in Yemo's hand, the seal character was particularly conspicuous. Obviously, it was exactly the same as the previous seal character. They should be of the same origin. As Yemo removed the word seal from the light sword, in an instant, endless hostility filled the world. The laws of the way of the sword danced, as if in an instant there were countless experts of the way of the sword chanting for this sword light, and countless sword gods resonated at the same time. Whoosh! This sword light tore the sky and fiercely shot in the direction of the underworld lord. Fast, fast, fast. The speed of this sword was too fast. It surpassed space and time. In an instant, it rushed to the front of the underworld lord's face. Poochie! This sword directly tore the sky and slashed at the underworld lord's face. The underworld lord had just broken free from the seal of the seal character. He had no time to react and was directly slashed by the sword. Bang! The underworld lord's entire head was smashed on the spot, and his imperial blood suddenly exploded. The underworld lord's roar could be heard throughout the universe. His head was reconstructed in front of everyone. He had never imagined that he would be tricked and his head would be smashed by a sword. How could he not be angry? He had just vowed that Yi Shiwen was definitely not his opponent, but now, his head had been destroyed by the sword chi in the seal that Yi Shiwen had left behind. This was simply a slap in the face, a ruthless slap in the face. It's done, ha ha ha. Everyone was immediately overjoyed. From the moment the underworld lord attacked just now, he had displayed an overly strong side. No matter what kind of attack they had, it had no effect on him. He was simply like an unsolvable bug. Although they did not say it out loud, they actually did not have much confidence in their hearts. And now, seeing that Yemo's attack had worked, how could they not be elated? The most important thing was that it proved that the underworld lord was not a true martial emperor. If he used his full strength, there was still hope of killing him. Many experts who were not from the regal sect could not help but be terrified when they saw this scene. The emperor's inheritance, this was the true heritage of the emperor's inheritance. The underworld lord, who no one could do anything about, had actually suffered a huge loss here. If he had not been forced to the extreme, who would have thought that Divine Palace still had such a hidden trump card? This was also the fundamental key reason why Yi Shiwen had to lure the Inverse Emperor out to fight. If he had not lured the Inverse Emperor out, the current situation that the Underworld Lord was facing would be the situation that Yi Shiwen had to face back then. How could Yi Shiwen not have to carefully set up that trap? I must flatten Divine Palace! The Underworld Lord roared, but his roar had not yet ended. Another shocking sword chi penetrated the galaxy like a mountain and blasted the Underworld Lord's chest. Bang! The Underworld Lord was blasted away on the spot. His chest instantly exploded, and it was a bloody mess. He screamed continuously, and his angry roar shocked the world. Whoosh! 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 One sword light after another fell from the sky and directly blasted towards the Underworld Lord. Wave after wave of sword chi caught the Dark Supremacy completely off guard. Everyone was dumbfounded. How much sword chi was stored in Divine Palace? It could be released continuously and hit an emperor to the point that he could not even lift his head. This was really enough. Bang! 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 The deafening sounds of collisions made everyone's teeth ache. The dignified underworld sovereign was actually forced to this extent. At the same time, they were also shocked by the depth of Divine Palace's foundation. One must know that this kind of sword chi was almost equivalent to an all-out attack of an emperor. It was not something that could be easily sealed. Therefore, even among the various emperors' inheritances, there were not many such techniques. However, there were so many Divine Palace experts. Even if their emperor had just ascended the throne, there were still too many of them. However, the storm-like sword lights finally stopped. That split second was enough for the underworld supremacy to take a breather and regroup. He was just stunned by Yimo's continuous attacks at the beginning. Otherwise, with his strength, he would not be so weak. Only Yimo, who had followed 2 emperors, knew some of the emperor's weaknesses. Only then could he have such a wonderful continuous attack. Otherwise, it was impossible to hurt the underworld lord at all. "You are dead." The underworld lord's eyes were filled with anger. He was no longer like in the beginning, when he did not care at all. He just treated them like ants and did not care at all. He was already furious to the extreme. A dignified emperor was schemed against like this, and even his head was smashed. Although in a sense, the person who smashed his head was Yi Shiwen, he didn't have time to think so much at this time. Only his unimaginable anger was burning in his heart. "Everyone in Divine Palace, no one will be spared. I want you to die a horrible death." The underworld lord's loud roar came. "No one will be spared from my Divine Palace. I also want to see if you have such a method." Suddenly, a chilly voice resounded from the horizon. However, as soon as this voice fell, a figure appeared in front of everyone. The figure stepped on a golden lotus, and broke out of the dazzling light. "Martial Emperor, it's the Martial Emperor. Great, the Martial Emperor has returned." Everyone recognized who this figure was and could not help but cry tears of joy. It could be said that during this period of time, they were almost forced to the limit by the underworld lord. They almost overturned a small half of the heavens and myriad realms. They did not know how many creatures were slaughtered and turned into an undead army. Now, he had arrived in front of the mountain gate of the divine court. Everyone had joined hands, but they weren't a match for him. This had left everyone in despair. Many people were wondering where Yi Shiwen had gone under such circumstances. And where could he have gone? And now Yi Shiwen had finally appeared in front of everyone. When the underworld lord saw that the person who appeared was actually Yi Shiwen, he could not help but feel nervous. No matter what he said before, Yi Shiwen's prestige had already spread throughout the heavens and myriad realms in the past tens of thousands of years. These people lived in Yi Shiwen's shadow. It was impossible to say that they were not afraid of Yi Shiwen. "Yi Shiwen, you finally showed up." The underworld lord looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. His eyes were red and there was a faint murderous aura released from his face. "Yes, I'm back," said Yi Shiwen. "Fortunately, I still made it in time. However, underworld lord, just now you said that you want to trample my divine palace and slaughter everyone in my divine palace. Is that right? Say it again if you have the guts." Chapter 2979. If you have the guts, say it again. Suddenly, everyone was stunned by Yi Shiwen's words. Domineering? What is domineering? This is domineering. Yi Shiwen's domineering aura didn't diminish even though he was facing a powerful emperor. He clearly didn't take the underworld supremacy seriously. Even if the underworld supremacy had once defeated the myriad heavens and realms, he was still a junior in front of Yi Shiwen. Although the gap of more than 20,000 years was nothing in terms of the lifespan of an emperor, and they should be regarded as peers, everyone had a feeling of a gap of generations. Yi Shiwen should not be in their generation, or it should be said that ordinary people could not be compared to him, even if they were also emperor lords. The underworld lord squinted his eyes. He was not intimidated by Yi Shiwen's aura. After all, he was also an emperor lord, and he had his own pride. How could he lower his head in front of Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. You have no right to be arrogant in front of me. You are an emperor lord, and I am also an emperor lord. Both emperor lords? That's ridiculous. Yi Shiwen sneered slightly. Could it be that Ming Di died in such a hurry that he did not teach you about the Ninth Realm Emperor Lord? You have just become an Emperor Lord. How can you compete with me? Yi Shiwen didn't wait for the Dark Supremacy's reply. He continued to speak. I roughly understood your master's plan after seeing you. I didn't take you seriously at first. You were just an ant that escaped. Even Dark Emperor was killed by me. So, the Dark Nation wouldn't be able to stir up any big waves. However, I didn't expect that you would become so powerful. It seems that Dark Emperor was already prepared for this. If I kill him, I'll leave a seed like you behind. In the heavens and myriad realms, there are countless geniuses and heroes. How can you be the first one? Ming Di must have left some tricks behind. Yi Shiwen walked over step by step. Behind him, there was a brilliant light. You don't look like you have just achieved Tao. Could it be that he transferred his Tao source to you? Yi Shiwen's vision was very sharp, and he was very wise. There were many things in the world that he didn't know, but he could naturally understand the whole story with just a glance. This was the only reason that could explain why the Underworld Lord, who had just become a martial emperor, was so powerful, almost comparable to the Second Realm. When he tore apart the shackles of the heavens during his confinement period, he was only at the consummate level of the First Realm. How could the Dark Lord be more powerful than him? This was impossible. That's right, Yi Shiwen. I didn't expect you to have such good foresight. However, even so, I can't save you today. You can't kill me. I'm not the Underworld Emperor, said the Underworld Lord coldly. Yi Shiwen understood what he was implying. He was clearly saying that Yi Shiwen had killed Ming Di because he had an unfair advantage. He had taken advantage of Ming Di's injuries to kill him. There was nothing to be proud of. Do you think that I have an unfair advantage? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Isn't it? Said the Underworld Lord coldly. You took advantage of his injuries to kill him. You are just a despicable person who took advantage of others. Ha 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 ha. Yi Shiwen laughed loudly. Taking advantage of others? Despicable scum. I find these words extremely laughable coming from your mouth. Do you know that if Ming Di hadn't taken advantage of the situation and ambushed the master of the underworld from behind, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. He only has himself to blame for his current predicament. Moreover, you're talking to me about fairness? You only saw that he was seriously injured, but you didn't see that he had cultivated for who knows how many years, and I had only just attained the Tao. Do you think that this is fair? Or does fairness depend on the person? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, You are too childish. I really don't know why Ming Di chose you as his successor. If you were a coward, I might not have rushed to kill you. But it's different now. You must die because you are committing a sin. Everyone wants you dead, so you must die. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, You are too naive? Destiny? I never believe in destiny. I only believe in myself, said the Underworld Lord coldly. You don't understand. This is not destiny but the will of all living beings. When you think that you are above all living beings, you will understand that you have gone astray, said Yi Shiwen lightly. Astray? I never believed in this. My path is the best path. My path is destiny. My path is what the Great Way thinks. You don't have to use this method to shake my heart. It's useless. Today we can have a fair fight. I will let the world understand that the inheritance of the Underworld Kingdom isn't as weak as the rumors say, said the Underworld Lord coldly. When he was still an emperor, he was plagued by such rumors. This was because when Ming Di was defeated by Yi Shiwen, it looked too easy. Even though Ming Di was equally powerful, he couldn't even withstand 10 moves and died in Yi Shiwen's hands. This made many people who didn't know the truth think that the Underworld Kingdom was actually just SOSO. How could the pride in his heart endure this? In other words, he couldn't bear it at all. There is no Tao that is weak. The one who is weak is oneself, said Yi Shiwen lightly. Although he didn't like Ming Di's actions, he didn't belittle Ming Di's Tao either. After all, if his opponent was trash, then wouldn't that prove that he was trash as well? He wasn't worth anything at all. Yi Shiwen, you are too arrogant. Do you really think that you are invincible in the world? You are not even in the 9th realm. The Underworld Lord finally couldn't bear it anymore. This was because he felt that Yi Shiwen didn't care about him at all. This was a humiliation. He regarded Yi Shiwen as a powerful enemy who must be killed, but Yi Shiwen didn't care about him at all. It could even be said that Yi Shiwen didn't care about him at all. He was even worse than his master, who was on the verge of death. The Underworld Lord finally made his move. He looked coldly at Yi Shiwen and walked towards Yi Shiwen step by step. He was incomparably majestic. After all, he was an emperor-level figure who shocked the world. In his eyes there was a scene of the birth of the world and the chaos. His every move had a great pressure that made people tremble. He was a terrifying existence that could make everyone in the world tremble and submit. A worn-out iron robe appeared on his body. It looked ordinary, but Yi Shiwen could see that it was actually a Tao tool. It was just that even Yi Shiwen couldn't see the origin of this Tao tool. It seemed to be a Tao tool passed down from a very long time ago. Otherwise, with Yi Shiwen's cultivation and knowledge, it was impossible for him to be ignorant. This robe of yours is quite unique. Facing the Underworld Lord, who had become serious, Yi Shiwen didn't have the slightest change in expression. It made people feel as if a spring breeze was caressing their faces. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen nervously. This battle was another battle between two emperors. Yi Shiwen's prestige had grown day by day over the past tens of thousands of years. However, the strength of the Underworld Lord couldn't be underestimated. He was even more invincible in the past few years. This was another battle of generations. Martial Emperor, kill him. This guy is too much. Yemo roared. Yi Shiwen nodded. His expression didn't change. He just faintly said, "He can't leave. This time, he must die. He must die." "You want me to die?" The Underworld Lord laughed. He was so angry that he laughed. From the beginning to the end, Yi Shiwen had never put him in his eyes. This was a great humiliation. "Yi Shiwen, you will pay the price," said the Underworld Lord. "This robe was found by my master countless years ago. According to his speculation, it might be a heavenly robe that had existed since the mythological era. I fled from the Netherworld Kingdom in a hurry. I didn't bring anything with me. In the end, I only brought this robe with me. I haven't refined it into a Tao tool. Today, I will use it to kill you." Something from the mythological era? Yi Shiwen's interest was piqued. The heavens and the 10,000 worlds were divided according to time. After the Second War of Resistance against the heavens, it was the long ancient era. In this era, only the Emperor of Qin had truly attained the Tao. He had become an emperor and dominated the world. The Second War of Resistance against the heavens had happened in the medieval era. In that era, the three races of humans, demons, and demons had fought each other. Countless heavens' pride and outstanding talents had emerged. Many emperor lords had stood side by side. Finally, the three races had joined forces to fight against the heavenly race who had broken out of the seal. This was the medieval era. Even further back than the medieval era was the beginning of the heavenly race's domination of the world. Then, there had been a chaotic war with the three races. Finally, the heavenly race had been sealed. This was the first war of resistance against the heavens. This was the ancient era. Even further back than the ancient era, even further back than the heavenly race's domination of the world, was the so-called mythological era. For example, the Titan race was one of the countless divine races who had dominated the world during the mythological era. There had been a chaotic era before the mythological era. It was said that there had been 3,000 demon gods. Each of them wasn't inferior to the emperor lords. Finally, they had transformed into the 3,000 great ways of the world. However, that era was too far back. So, it could only be regarded as a myth or a legend. The only thing that could be regarded as a historical record was the mythological era. However, even the survivors of the Second War of Resistance against the Heavens were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chelan horns. Not to mention the mythological era, which was even more ancient than the First War of Resistance against the Heavens. In fact, it could only exist as a myth and legend. In that era, the innate gods had ruled the world. They were unimaginably powerful. The myriad races had no choice but to surrender to these innate gods. However, that era had been too glorious and prosperous. However, it had also been defeated too quickly. It seemed as if it had been defeated overnight. The collapse of the mythological era had also been completed overnight. Then, there had been a long period of chaos. It had been too chaotic. So much so that there weren't many historical materials. This continued until the heavenly race had emerged and ruled the world. Now, this Taoist robe was actually from an endless era. How could Yi Shiwen not be interested in this? Chapter 2980. The rise of the mythological era could no longer be investigated. Its collapse was also too bizarre. In an instant, those innate gods who once ruled the world seemed to have died. No one knew what happened to them. No one knew. There was not much textual evidence that had been passed down until now. However, judging from this Taoist robe, there should also be emperor level masters in the mythological era. However, they might have been passed down from the chaotic era. Those eras were too long ago. It was really hard to understand. However, according to the legend, the cultivation system of the mythological era was completely different from the current one. It formed its own lineage and used innate magical powers as the main cultivation method. Yi Shiwen was very interested. After all, at his level, all magical powers and martial arts could be learned from each other. Perhaps there would be other gains. Don't worry, he won't live. I am interested in the things of the mythological era. Maybe I can see a completely different path, said Yi Shiwen. Unfortunately, you don't have the chance now. The underworld supremacy shouted loudly and attacked directly. A dazzling brilliance shot straight towards Yi Shiwen's face as soon as he attacked. He wanted to kill Yi Shiwen with a single strike. Bang! This attack directly bombarded 3 inches in front of Yi Shiwen. It was blocked by the barrier spread by the time robe. This attack was very strong. It directly hit the time robe and made it tremble slightly. It was not something that ordinary people could imagine. Humph! The Dark Lord sneered when he failed to kill Yi Shiwen. He took a step forward without any hesitation, and threw a punch towards Yi Shiwen. The fist energy formed a huge light pillar that rushed straight to the sky. It spread out countless huge lights. Each of them was like an ancient divine mountain, exuding unimaginable power. One could imagine how terrifying this punch was. Just the pressure alone was enough to cause the heavens and earth to tremble violently before it even reached them. The power of this punch caused many formations in the divine court to automatically awaken to resist it. Compared to now, the underworld lord had not really used his full strength. Perhaps to him, there was no opponent in the divine court who was worthy of his full strength at that time. Bang! Yi Shiwen raised his hand and blocked this punch. The 2 emperors clashed, and the world wailed and trembled. The shock waves spread out, and many people who wanted to watch the battle from a close distance couldn't help but retreat again and again. But very quickly they felt that the terrifying pressure stopped almost immediately. A formation pattern formed in front of them, almost immediately forming a large formation, protecting everyone in the battlefield. As for the undead, they naturally didn't have such protection. In the aftermath of the battle, more than half of them were annihilated in an instant. Previously, no matter how hard they tried to kill the undead, it seemed as if the battle would never end. Now, however, with just a single move, more than half of the undead had been killed. The survivors of the netherworld had also suffered great losses. Very soon, the underworld lord also noticed Yi Shiwen's arrangement. He couldn't help but be furious. Yi Shiwen, you dare to be distracted while fighting me. You're really courting death. He was furious to the extreme. Yi Shiwen didn't put him in his eyes at all. It was a slap to his face. Die, hand of death. His broad palm slammed down towards Yi Shiwen. Each of his fingers was as huge as a mountain. Boundless death energy pervaded the air, forming an incomparably huge phantom of Hell Emperor in the sky. It could reverse life and death, and sever yin and yang. Every finger was condensed from an unknown amount of death energy. It contained the great magical power of the underworld lord. It condensed into one, and directly covered Yi Shiwen. This palm seemed to have locked the heavens and the myriad world. It had unimaginable power, making Yi Shiwen unable to escape or avoid it. Yi Shiwen stood motionless in the face of this attack. He let this big hand fall down. Everywhere was collapsing. The world was also wailing in grief. It was being destroyed. The world didn't exist forever. It also had its own prosperity. It also had its own destruction. It was just like the life and death of a human being. It could be seen that the underworld lord's research on the way of death had reached a very shocking level. The time robe on Yi Shiwen's body erupted with a burst of astonishing rays of light. The power of time was like an invisible giant hand. The world that had been shattered by the power of death had unexpectedly stabilized at this time. It couldn't be broken at all. Take my punch, 6 paths of reincarnation. As soon as Yi Shiwen came up, he also used a powerful move. He blasted out a punch, and the world shook violently. Bang! Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation and the hand of death collided fiercely. In an instant, endless light burst out. In an instant, the world collapsed, and the shocking waves formed completely submerged the army of the undead. Those remnants of the netherworld kingdom also died in an instant. The underworld lord didn't care about the life and death of these people. They were just some ants. So what if they died? To an emperor lord, these were just ants. As long as he killed Yi Shiwen, the world would be his. He could have as many subordinates as he wanted. Yi Shiwen blocked the underworld lord's attack with one strike. Before the shockwave of the collision could land on the divine court, it was completely eliminated by the formation that Yi Shiwen had set up. Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing that Yi Shiwen still had the mood to do such a thing in the midst of an intense battle, it was obvious that he was doing it with ease. It shouldn't be difficult for him to deal with the underworld lord. The other heaven's chosen supreme looked at the two people in the battle with complicated feelings. They were supposed to be of the same generation, but now they were left far behind by the two of them. One became an emperor and the other didn't. This was the difference between heaven and earth. On the sacred mountain inside the divine court, Dawn couldn't help but cry tears of joy when she saw her husband return safely. Even though she rarely cried with her current cultivation, it was different this time. Over such a long period of time, there were all sorts of rumors about Yi Shiwen. How could she not worry? Even the enemy had come knocking on their door, and even his little daughter was nearly abducted. How could she not worry? Now that she finally saw that her husband was fine, she finally heaved a sigh of relief. Daddy, Daddy! Little Crescent Moon also saw her father in the battle outside. To her, she still didn't understand those complicated things. She had completely forgotten about being ambushed and crying in fright. Now that she saw Yi Shiwen return, she was very happy. And outside, the intense battle was still happening. It was just the beginning. Yi Shiwen, you're too careless. The underworld lord spoke coldly and ruthlessly. Another strike landed on Yi Shiwen. With the enhancement of the mysterious Taoist robe, the power increased exponentially. This was also the reason why an emperor lord who had just become an emperor could only be at the bottom of the emperor lord. Apart from cultivation, the most important thing was that they didn't have a Taoist weapon. Even if their strength was similar, there would be a huge gap when one side had a Taoist weapon and the other didn't. This attack directly pierced through the world. Those quasi-emperors also sensed how extraordinary this attack was. It was almost like a big dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, tearing the world apart. It suddenly pierced through the sky, rushed into the galaxy, and finally fell on Yi Shiwen's body. What kind of strike is this? He didn't even use his full strength just now. How can he be so strong? Emperor Ai is definitely not his match. Too strong. He's really too strong. Many people sensed how terrifying this strike was, especially the quasi-emperors. They deeply understood the gap between them and the Emperor Lord. From now on, if they didn't become emperors, they wouldn't be able to live on. Bang! Yi Shiwen merely raised his hand and crushed this astonishing attack. Yes, he crushed it. Everyone seemed to think that they had seen it wrong. Yi Shiwen actually crushed the attack of the Dark Lord. He didn't just simply block it. What did this mean? It meant that although the martial emperor was not in the myriad world these years, his cultivation had become more and more unfathomable. It was unimaginably tyrannical. Arrogant? I don't think so at all. Dark Lord, if you only have this kind of strength, then this day next year will be the anniversary of your death. Yi Shiwen had been in a state of passive defense just now. However, no one would think that he was in a state of passive defense because he couldn't defeat the Dark Lord. On the contrary, although he was in a state of passive defense, he had the upper hand. But now, he had finally launched a counterattack. After Yi Shiwen had crushed the Dark Lord's attack, he directly attacked the Dark Lord. He crossed the vast starry sky in one step and arrived in front of the Dark Lord. Then, his hand chopped down like a treasured saber. Under the attack of Yi Shiwen's saber, the protective spiritual power of the Dark Lord was not a match at all. It disintegrated and melted between heaven and earth, and Yi Shiwen seemed to have turned into the most tyrannical and terrifying existence in the world. His attack directly imprinted on the body of the Dark Lord. Bang! The Dark Lord was hit by the attack, and he immediately retreated. He only felt a surge of blood in his chest. His eyes flashed with a look of disbelief. It was just an ordinary attack of Yi Shiwen, but it was a heavy injury for him. If it wasn't for the Taoist robe that he was wearing to block the attack at the critical moment, he would have been seriously injured by Yi Shiwen and his vitality would have been injured. His pupils shrank slightly. Obviously, at this time, he finally realized that he had completely underestimated Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could kill his respected master. How could he underestimate this person? Chapter 2981. It was just a simple attack, but it made people feel as if they had been struck by a thunderbolt. It was unimaginably powerful. Yi Shiwen was able to suppress the world for tens of thousands of years. He was indeed worthy of his reputation. It could be said that he was very powerful. What's wrong? Weren't you very arrogant before, saying that you wanted to flatten the divine court? What about now? Yi Shiwen said coldly. Many disciples of the divine court felt extremely relieved. That's right, they were suppressed by the underworld lord for so long. Even though he was an emperor, they were not convinced. The underworld lord was simply bullying the weak. Now that Yi Shiwen was back, he was not as arrogant as before. How dare he still be arrogant? In front of our martial emperors, the strength that he is so proud of is nothing. Humph, you only have such combat power because of the source of the great path left behind by Emperor Ming. But you are too impatient. If you were willing to wait a little longer, you might be able to compete with me after you have completely absorbed the source of the great path. It's a pity that you rushed here to die now. What a pity! When Emperor Ming passed the source of the great path to you, he must have never thought that you would be so stupid to do such a thing. Yi Shiwen said lightly. It's a pity that it's all wasted. Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. Do you think that this is all my strength? Don't you want to know how powerful the source of the great path left behind by my master is? I'll let you see it now. The underworld lord roared. His eyes opened and his aura suddenly rose. His body grew a full head taller, and the power of death began to spread wildly from his body. Behind him, a faintly discernible figure of Emperor Ming was formed, as if Emperor Ming had come back to life. Yi Shiwen, you took advantage of my master when he was seriously injured. Today, I will make you pay with your blood. The underworld lord's big hand suddenly grabbed out, and turned into a circle of light of the power of death. It directly forced Yi Shiwen, who had just arrived in front of him, back. Then, he suddenly punched towards Yi Shiwen. They wanted to blast Yi Shiwen into pieces. Insignificant skill. Yi Shiwen's fist blasted out, and directly collided with the Dark Lord's fist. The void was shattered at the center of the collision between the two fists. Countless primal chaos poured out and formed a huge crack. The extremely terrifying power poured into it. The underworld's supremacy was actually not at a disadvantage in this attack. His body grew larger and larger like a demon god. Even the sky and earth were torn open. There seemed to be a force constantly pouring into his body from afar, as if someone was transferring power to him. This force caused the stellar energy around him to become denser and denser, causing his clothes to flutter loudly. Again. Dark Lord's voice was cold as he pounced towards Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 An even more intense battle broke out in an instant. The Dark Lord continued to attack. It seemed as if he wanted to peel off Yi Shiwen's skin and swallow his bones alive. Only then would he be willing to give up. He already hated Yi Shiwen to the core. He must kill Yi Shiwen. However, what truly shocked many experts was the fact that the Dark Lord's strength was continuously increasing with each attack. People who didn't know the truth would think that he had absorbed some kind of energy from Yi Shiwen's body. Therefore, he was constantly improving. How is it possible? He is already an emperor. Logically speaking, it should not be possible for his cultivation to improve by leaps and bounds. How can he be so strong? Many people found it strange. After cultivating to the sovereign emperor realm, the rest was to rely on the accumulation of improvement over a long period of time. They had never heard of a situation where one could advance by leaps and bounds after reaching the sovereign emperor realm, unless one used some kind of natural treasure. It was almost impossible to comprehend it in battle, because the emperor realm was almost perceptive and could see through everything. Since they could see through everything, it was impossible to suddenly understand a certain point and suddenly improve their cultivation. That was simply impossible. Are you going to swallow the great way origin that your master left for you? Others couldn't understand, but how could Yi Shiwen not understand? He saw through what the underworld supremacy was doing almost immediately. That's right, it's about time, said the underworld supremacy. Previously, his strength was far beyond the strength that an emperor realm who had just become an emperor should have. He relied on the great way origin that was left by Emperor Ming. It was almost like a heavenly treasure, constantly nourishing the underworld's supremacy, making his future cultivation path more smooth. But now it was different. The underworld's supremacy was really going to swallow the great way origin in one go. His cultivation might be enough to improve for a while, but in the long run it was not worthwhile. After all, the great way origin had been swallowed. It was gone. It was impossible for it to appear again. Yi Shiwen, you killed my master. Now I will send you to heaven with the power bestowed by my master. I will make you repent in hell for the rest of your life. The underworld supremacy roared. His aura also seemed to be raised to the extreme after the series of attacks, reaching a bottleneck. He actually rushed to the great perfection of the first realm? Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and immediately understood. He could also see that after swallowing the Great Way origin of Emperor Ming, the underworld supremacy's cultivation had skyrocketed. However, the underworld supremacy's improvement was just the beginning. His aura was still rising crazily. Finally, he broke through the barrier of the second realm and truly entered the second realm of the Emperor realm. The underworld supremacy's aura became more dangerous and violent. It seemed that he still had no way to control the realm that he had just advanced. The aura on his body became exceptionally dangerous and terrifying. Yi Shiwen, I know that your cultivation is already at the second realm. Now that I have also entered the second realm, we are equal. This battle is enough for me to kill you, said the underworld supremacy coldly. However, his eyes were incomparably crazy. He had waited for this day for too long. Seeing that the underworld supremacy had actually swallowed the Great Way origin, everyone was shocked. No one expected that the underworld supremacy actually had such a good thing hidden. It could let his cultivation soar by leaps and bounds in such a short time. Is the martial emperor in trouble now? At the same realm, the original advantage of the martial emperor's realm no longer exists. That's right. Now that he has been pulled back to the same starting line, it won't be easy for the martial emperor to kill him. At the same realm? Do you think that the same realm will be of any use to me? I am truly invincible at the same realm. Yi Shiwen sneered. He didn't take it to heart at all. I want you to die. The underworld supremacy's aura was still rising and still soaring. With every step he took, the vitality in the sky would fuse with his spiritual power. It was simply powerful and terrifying. At this moment, he was the overlord of the world, the only overlord of the world. Around his body, the Taoist robe also seemed to have merged with the world as his aura changed. It faintly formed an armor of vitality of the world. It was mysterious and noble, gorgeous and graceful. Whoosh! The underworld supremacy suddenly rushed in front of Yi Shiwen. His hands suddenly tore, and then directly tore towards Yi Shiwen. The sky was torn apart, and the mighty space energy was about to tear Yi Shiwen into pieces. He hated Yi Shiwen to the extreme, and he couldn't wait for Yi Shiwen to die. I'm going to let you understand now that even if you have swallowed the Great Way source and your strength has skyrocketed, your strength can't be compared to mine. Yi Shiwen directly attacked. His big hand suddenly grabbed out, and for a moment it covered the sky and the sun. It transformed into a terrifying power, and attacked towards the underworld supremacy. Bang! The big hands of the two collided fiercely, and the world seemed to collapse. It shook in all directions, and no one could clearly see what was happening. Underworld supremacy, I want the Taoist robe on your body. It's really a waste to use it on you. The time robe on Yi Shiwen's body shone brightly. Not only the time robe, but all the Taoist tools on his body shone brightly, as if they were going to illuminate the entire river of history. Yi Shiwen's strength had also climbed to the extreme. What is this? How is this possible? It's only been 20,000 years. How can you already be in the second realm great perfection? The underworld supremacy immediately sensed that Yi Shiwen's aura had really climbed to the extreme. He was actually in the second realm great perfection, and he was much stronger than him, who had just entered the second realm. He couldn't believe it at all. Even with Yi Shiwen's tyrannical strength, if he tore apart the shackles of heaven and became an emperor during the confinement period, he would at most be in the first realm great perfection. Even if he improved further in 20,000 years, he would only be an ordinary second realm sovereign emperor. With the strength that he had improved after swallowing the Great Way source, it was absolutely enough to suppress Yi Shiwen. This was also the fundamental reason why he couldn't wait to launch the corpse calamity. He had absolute confidence, but now he discovered that he was wrong. He misjudged Yi Shiwen's strength and overestimated his own strength. Yi Shiwen was actually in the second realm great perfection. How much time has passed? Impossible, what kind of adventure did you have in the chaos? Such a thought flashed in the underworld supremacy's mind. Yes, this was the only way to explain why Yi Shiwen's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds in just a short period of 20,000 years, and actually rushed to the second realm great perfection. You're right. Unfortunately, even so, you still have to die. Yi Shiwen sneered slightly. The aura on his body was completely released without any scruples. This was the first time he had completely erupted. The underworld supremacy's guess was right. Yi Shiwen's rapid advancement in cultivation was indeed related to the adventure in the chaos. To be precise, after swallowing a large amount of yellow middle plum, his cultivation had advanced continuously and rushed to the second realm great perfection. Chapter 2982. There were not many ordinary people who could smell the yellow middle plum, let alone swallow it. Yi Shiwen swallowed a lot of it. Even with his current status, it could be regarded as a series of fortuitous encounters. If not, he would not be able to accumulate his cultivation to the level of second realm great perfection in such a short period of time. There were 9 stages of the sovereign monarch realm, and advancing in each stage required a vast amount of accumulation. Compared to the accumulation he needed now, even if he added up the accumulation required for all the stages of cultivation, it would not be enough to advance in the sovereign monarch realm. It was completely different. Without the yellow middle plum, even with Yi Shiwen's accumulation, it would still take tens of thousands of years to cultivate to the level of second realm great perfection. However, Yi Shiwen only cultivated to the level of second realm great perfection, and he ended this trip to the chaos world. Even with Yi Shiwen's conceit, he did not dare to break through in the chaos world because the chaos world was too dangerous. Even Yi Shiwen did not know how many terrifying creatures existed in it. The reason why Yi Shiwen returned was that he planned to return to a safe place for close cultivation. In addition, he also had an ominous premonition in his heart, so he hurried back. In the end, he still caught up with this matter. It was just that even Yi Shiwen did not expect that not long after the heaven and earth shackles disappeared, a sovereign lord actually appeared. Moreover, it was such a powerful second realm sovereign lord. If he was still in the first realm, with Nid's strength, it would be impossible for him to wreak havoc in the world. Even though it was impossible for everyone to kill him, they could still stop him and prevent him from doing as he pleased. However, compared to the first realm, the second realm sovereign lord was a huge improvement. It was incomparable. Therefore, everyone could not stop the underworld lord who caused a monstrous corpse disaster. Even if you are also in the second realm, so what? Yi Shiwen, do you really think that you are invincible in the world? Said the underworld lord coldly. After recovering from the initial shock, he returned to the cold and arrogant underworld lord. Perhaps I am not invincible, but it is enough to kill you, Yi Shiwen just said faintly. The aura on his body was increasing wildly. The chi of heaven and earth formed a storm, sweeping wildly. Kill me! Underworld supremacy stood with his hands behind his back. We are both imperial emperors. What right do you have to dare to kill me? In an instant, the Nether Lord finally made his move. His entire body seemed to have turned into a ball of light, and the laws around him buzzed. In an instant, a sky-piercing divine light shot out and pierced through the sky. The boundless principles formed a frenzy, piercing through everything, and directly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's body suddenly retreated, and behind him, devil wings suddenly spread out, protecting him inside. His wings seemed to wrap up the entire world. Bang! With a loud bang, the demon wings instantly blocked the attack. Endless shock waves formed and directly rushed into the star field, into the cold and dark universe. Boom! In the universe, countless stars were swept by the shock wave and turned into dust on the spot. This was the might of a battle between imperial monarchs. Even if they were separated by millions of kilometers, they could still destroy the universe. Everyone really felt cold, and their bodies were ice-cold. The battle between the two had once again rushed to a higher level. Compared to the first realm, the second realm Imperial Emperor was even more terrifying and even more shocking. Many people's faces turned pale, and they began to tremble. "Is this all you've got?" After Yi Shiwen blocked the attack, his whole body shone with divine light. Above his head, the martial emperor's seal appeared, illuminating the river of time. "I am the martial emperor, and I spread martial arts to the world. All living beings are equal." Yi Shiwen let out a loud and clear voice, and it seemed to have spread throughout the entire universe. His body revolved with unimaginable power, and then he made his move. "Break for me, martial emperor's seal." The martial emperor's seal above Yi Shiwen's head expanded against the wind, and after almost growing to a small half of the universe, it suddenly fell down. What martial arts is this? The underworld supremacy had never seen this kind of martial arts. It should be known that the underworld kingdom had existed for a very, very long time. It could be said that they had records of almost all kinds of martial arts. He had seen all kinds of martial arts, and he had even seen martial arts of the imperial monarch level. "This is my martial arts, martial emperor's seal." At this moment, the martial emperor's seal had already completely crushed down, and the 3,000 martial arts directly manifested, as if it had manifested a world. The underworld supremacy wanted to fight against a world, but he didn't have time to react, and he didn't even have time to retreat. He also didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would have such a move. By the time he wanted to leave, it was already too late. Bang! 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 The enchantment of the underworld supremacy's robe began to crumble inch by inch. It seemed like he wasn't a match for the underworld supremacy at all. "We are both in the second realm, but how can you be so strong?" The underworld supremacy roared. Death martial scripture, erupt with the true power of death. An unimaginably terrifying power erupted from the underworld supremacy's body in a single breath, and he slammed his palm towards the martial emperor's seal. The death martial scripture manifested a series of death characters, and these characters formed a martial scripture. This was the foundation of the Netherworld Kingdom, and it wouldn't be taken out easily under normal circumstances. Right now, the underworld supremacy didn't care so much anymore, and directly used it to resist Yi Shiwen's surprise attack. This death martial scripture wasn't just a martial art, it was also an incomparably powerful magic treasure. It had experienced the blessings of the Netherworld Emperor and the underworld supremacy, and their martial arts had condensed on it, forming a super magic treasure. Rumble! The death martial scripture and the martial emperor's seal collided on the spot, and the entire starfield was destroyed along with it. The entire universe rumbled and trembled, and even the people hiding in the most remote areas could feel the aftermath of such a battle. It was unimaginably powerful. This was a direct collision between the martial arts of both sides. The death martial scripture recorded all the mysteries of death in the world, and each character was a Tao character, and each character could be expanded into a peerless martial art by itself. And the martial emperor's seal had gathered Yi Shiwen's 3,000 martial arts, and was almost comparable to the 3,000 heavenly Tao. Both sides were invincible characters that stood above the common people. The collision of the two martial arts erupted with an everlasting radiance. The death martial scripture looks pretty good, but it's too much of a waste in your hands. You might as well leave it to me. Yi Shiwen roared, and the next wave of attacks arrived almost instantaneously. Once again, the martial emperor's seal smashed down. "Yi Shiwen, you want my death martial scripture with just you?" The underworld supremacy roared angrily. To him, this was also a kind of humiliation, a complete and utter humiliation. Yi Shiwen had actually dared to say such words right under his nose. Clearly, He didn't place him in his eyes at all. So what if I want it? Yi Shiwen's voice hadn't even faded when the martial emperor's seal directly smashed down. Everywhere it passed, even the space was crushed into powder. The might of the martial emperor's seal was simply unimaginable. Coupled with the fact that this was Yi Shiwen's life Dao tool, it could be said that he was like a fish in water when using it, and its might had doubled. Don't be too arrogant. The underworld's supremacy was being suppressed, but his counterattack had never stopped. The Taoist robe on his body also seemed to be awakening under this terrifying pressure from Yi Shiwen. This was the instinct of a Dao tool. They were already supreme among the Dao tools, so similarly, they couldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of challenge. At this time, it was actually faintly beginning to awaken. Haha, that's great. Yi Shiwen, you're too arrogant. You'll regret forcing me to this extent. The underworld's supremacy was immediately overjoyed when he saw this. Although he had obtained this Taoist robe for a long time, he had never been able to truly awaken it. That was because it was something from the mythological era. The system of the mythological era was simply not the same system as the current one. At that time, what was popular was innate magical powers. Even if one had already reached the Emperor realm, one would still only have a smattering of knowledge regarding the cultivation system of the mythological era. They were two completely different paths, and might even be in the opposite direction. It was precisely because of this that he could only unleash the basic functions of the Taoist robe. He was unable to truly unleash the power of this Taoist robe. But now, under Yi Shiwen's pressure, this Taoist robe was actually beginning to awaken. This was undoubtedly a really good thing for him. After awakening, the power of the Taoist robe would definitely be stronger. This would also increase his strength in disguise. The underworld's supremacy roared loudly. With the Taoist robe on his body as a foundation, he directly attacked on the spot. Stars were even evolving in his eyes, and the universe was being born and destroyed. The power of this Taoist robe erupted to the extreme at this time. It erupted with an aura that was enough to destroy the world. This attack could even shatter the entire universe. Not to mention the universe, even the chaos would cease to exist. That's all you can do. The path of cultivation does not allow for even the slightest bit of opportunism. In the end, you still resorted to opportunism. It would have been fine if you had properly digested the origin of the Great Path. But Ming Di left his origin of the Great Path to you, which was equivalent to cutting off his future path. In the end, you didn't cherish it. What a waste of his painstaking efforts! Yi Shiwen said faintly. The origin of the Great Path was incomparably precious to any Emperor realm's supremacy. Any damage to it would affect their cultivation, not to mention giving away a portion of the origin of the Great Path. In other words, even if Ming Di could survive, he would not be able to advance an inch. This was a huge price to pay. Yi Shiwen descended from the sky with the martial emperor's seal. Because he had been practicing the overturning sky seal for a long time, Yi Shiwen actually had a cultivation and understanding of seal martial arts that ordinary people could not imagine. That was why he could easily create his own martial arts. The martial emperor's seal was born from the overturning sky seal. However, it was stronger and more suitable for him. Chapter 2983. Boom! The martial emperor's seal collided with the death martial scripture once again. The time robe and the Taoist robe from the mythological era also engaged in a shocking confrontation. The terrifying power rippled in the universe. It seemed that the Taoist robe had begun to gradually recover under the stimulation of the time robe. Then, countless runes appeared on the Taoist robe in front of everyone. These runes were very strange. Even Yi Shiwen couldn't understand them for a while. This was simply incredible. The so-called text was used to record the affairs of the world. No matter how the form changed, its essence was ultimately the same. For an Emperor Lord who had seen through the origin of the heavenly way, he could see through the meaning of any text at a glance. He could even understand the text that he had never seen before. Rather than saying that he understood it, it was better to say that he could see through it directly from the origin. However, Yi Shiwen couldn't recognize these runes for a while. It must have something to do with the language system of the mythological era. After all, it was different. The techniques of both sides were earth-shattering, especially the Taoist robe and the time robe. It seemed as if they had entered into a crazy confrontation. The Taoist robe rose 1 foot while the devil robe rose 10 feet. The auras of both sides were constantly competing and rising. The time robe also seemed to have been provoked and began to rise crazily. Boom! 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 The attacks from both sides grew even more intense. However, a magic array automatically appeared around them, enveloping their attacks. Due to that, their attacks could not continue spreading out and destroy the world. This is the heavenly formation. It actually forced out the consciousness of the heavenly way. How terrifying is the battle between these two? This is a battle between Emperor Lords. I almost couldn't breathe just now. I thought I would be crushed to death by the aura. Many people breathed a sigh of relief. The battle between the two was too shocking. However, they finally couldn't feel the destructive aura anymore. Even a god-level expert couldn't do anything in the face of such power. The auras of both sides were soaring. However, everyone could see that Yi Shiwen had begun to gain the upper hand. Whether it was his techniques or his strength, he was suppressing the Dark Lord. Especially Yi Shiwen's ever-changing means. He had all kinds of martial arts, and all of them were completely different. He was even more tyrannical than the Dark Lord, who only had one martial art. However, Yi Shiwen was different. He had the help of the mysterious space. Not only had he learned a lot of martial arts, but he was also very proficient in all of them. Such a variety of techniques had made the Dark Lord feel like vomiting blood. Gradually, the underworld's supremacy felt that the origin of the great path in his body was being consumed at an alarming rate. He was able to fight against Yi Shiwen because Ming Di had left him the origin of the great path. However, this was also limited. Unlike Yi Shiwen, who used his own strength to activate it, all the losses could be replenished by himself. Yi Shiwen, do you really have to force me to that point? You won't have it easy either. The underworld's supremacy finally began to loosen up. At this moment, he no longer had the thought of killing Yi Shiwen. He had already understood that such an idea was too unrealistic. It was simply impossible for it to happen. However, he still felt that he was qualified to retreat. After all, to kill another emperor, even Yi Shiwen would definitely have to pay a painful price. After all, he was not a dabbler like Nid. In the worst-case scenario, they would be able to divide the world with Yi Shiwen. They would be isolated in the south. At the very least, they would be able to regroup and raise the banner of the Netherworld Kingdom again. They would also be a supreme-level existence at that time. So what if I force you to that point? I gave you a chance before, said Yi Shiwen coldly. His attacks did not stop, and he constantly forced the Dark Lord into a disadvantageous position. It was precisely because of this that the Dark Lord had the idea of retreating. This thought was also seen by everyone. Many people couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This corpse calamity had come to this step. Was it finally going to end? This was also good. If the two continued to fight, the entire universe would be torn apart. The collision of the Emperor level was too scary. It had been too long since the heavens and the realms had experienced such a collision. Do you really want to perish together with me? The underworld's supremacy roared. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would not even give him a decent chance to retreat. This was not like a confrontation between the Emperor level, because the confrontation between the Emperor level would not easily develop into a life-and-death battle. If one could kill the other, one would have to pay a painful price. It seemed that Yi Shiwen did not have the slightest self-awareness in this aspect. I gave you a chance, said Yi Shiwen coldly. Gave me a chance? What chance did you give me? The underworld supremacy was forced back by Yi Shiwen again. He retreated again and again. He calmed down the surging blood in his body and roared. After I annihilated the underworld nation, I did not continue to pursue you. Do you really think that I can't find you? I gave you a chance, but you don't know how to cherish it. You have just become an emperor, and you set off a shocking corpse disaster. You have brought disaster to the world. Aren't you courting death? Said Yi Shiwen as he shook his head lightly. He did not pursue the underworld supremacy previously because he left the orthodoxy a way out. The most important thing was that he did not take the underworld supremacy seriously. So what if the underworld supremacy became an emperor? He was still no match for Yi Shiwen. In this regard, Yi Shiwen was confident. He was very confident. Everyone was shocked. Only now did they know that the reason why the underworld supremacy could escape was that Yi Shiwen had shown mercy. Of course, Yi Shiwen was not so pedantic that he would not kill the underworld supremacy when he appeared in front of him. However, as long as the underworld supremacy hid and did not appear, Yi Shiwen would not care about him and let him live. Yi Shiwen, don't put on the appearance of an emperor to lecture me. You are an emperor-level supremacy, and I am also an emperor-level supremacy. What qualifications do you have to lecture me? The underworld supremacy was angered by Yi Shiwen's words because Yi Shiwen's words still showed that he did not take the underworld supremacy seriously. It was not easy for you to become an emperor-level supremacy. After the heaven and earth confinement period ended, you were the first to become an emperor-level supremacy. Heaven also gave you a chance, and this is how you repay it. I can only say that you shouldn't, said Yi Shiwen. You are only an emperor-level supremacy of the second realm, and I am also at the second realm. Even if I am not as good as you, what can you do to me? Said the underworld supremacy coldly. I don't need to pay any price to kill you. You will soon know what I can do to you. Yi Shiwen finally erupted with his strongest combat power. The Avicii sword in his hand directly transformed into a blood dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long. It directly soared into the sky and rushed into the cosmic starry sky. Then, it fiercely slashed towards the underworld supremacy. Impossible! Under this pressure, the enchantment on the Taoist robe directly collapsed in all directions. However, he would never give up like this. With the Taoist robe on his body, he also had a big list. He had never thought of bowing down to Yi Shiwen. This sword directly slashed down and shattered the star domain. The underworld supremacy had no time to escape. He did not want to escape either. He wanted to resist and seize his own path of survival. He did not know why, but such a feeling emerged in his heart. If this continued, perhaps he could only fight for his own path of survival instead of competing with Yi Shiwen and sharing the world equally. Boom! The most terrifying explosion resounded. The entire universe seemed to be split into two halves. The array formed by the Heaven's Way also collapsed on the spot in an instant. The Avicii sword slashed on the Taoist robe. Bang! A crack actually appeared on the Taoist robe. Originally, this Taoist robe was not the real peak. Otherwise, it would not have fallen into a deep sleep until the underworld supremacy obtained it. Now, in the face of Yi Shiwen, who had used his full strength and slashed with the Avicii sword, a crack still appeared on the spot. Pooh! The underworld supremacy spat out a mouthful of blood, which turned into a blood mist that filled the sky. His entire person was blasted away, and his screams shook the universe. Defeated, the underworld supremacy has been defeated. This was the only thought in everyone's mind. It was as if they were witnessing a miracle. The two of them had exchanged blows, and it was finally time to determine who was stronger. The two of them were not evenly matched at all. It seemed like Yi Shiwen had firmly controlled the situation from the beginning to the end. Everyone was sighing, especially those supreme geniuses, old antiques and old monsters. One after another, they all sighed. Even though they were all sovereign emperors, they were not a match for Yi Shiwen. Many people believed that they could also become emperors, and it was only a matter of time. But facing Yi Shiwen, even if they became emperors, they would still be suppressed by him. Such days were truly bitter. Yi Shiwen sent the underworld supremacy flying with a single slash of his sword. After that, a huge hand appeared and grabbed towards the death martial scripture. He directly grabbed the death martial scripture into the huge hand on the spot. The death martial scripture still wanted to struggle. Each of its words had spirituality and could differentiate between friend and foe. But at this moment it was useless. In Yi Shiwen's hands there was no way for it to escape. In just a short while, the death martial scripture was kept in his bag. And at this moment the underworld supremacy, who had finally completely realized and accepted this situation, promptly fled into the distance with lightning speed. Because of the battle between the two of them, the heavenly Tao had reinforced the laws of the heavens and earth. He had no way of tearing through space to escape, and could only flee as fast as he could. Yi Shiwen merely glanced at the underworld supremacy, and then chased after him. This time, he would not leave behind any future troubles. The martial emperor's seal spun and flew out on the spot. Like an ancient mountain range, it grew larger and larger, and then smashed down ruthlessly. Bang! The martial emperor's seal directly smashed onto the underworld supremacy. Even with the underworld supremacy's incomparably terrifying sovereign emperor-level physical body, he could not withstand such an attack. With a miserable scream, his physical body shattered into pieces. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.